The letter had been practical, cold even. Silas Mercer didn't write about love or companionship or any of the flowery nonsense he'd seen in other advertisements. He wrote about survival, seeking wife, must be strong, capable, willing to work. Ranch life is hard. If you expect ease or romance, look elsewhere. Room, board, protection provided. Honesty required. He'd posted it to 3 agencies back east and tried not to think too hard about what he was doing. A man didn't replace his dead wife like hiring ranch hands, but the alternative was losing everything Martha had loved. The land, the cattle, the life they'd built together before fever took her. 2 years of managing alone had proven what his neighbors already knew. One man couldn't run a ranch this size and survive. The responses came slowly. Most were from women who clearly hadn't read past rancher and protection. They wrote about their delicate constitutions, their refined sensibilities, their expectations of servants and social calls. Silas burned those letters in the stove. Only one response felt different. Mr. Mercer, I am not delicate. I am not refined. I can work, and I will work. I ask only for honesty in return, and freedom from a life I no longer wish to lead. If those terms suit you, I will come west. R. Hale. He'd written back the same day. 3 weeks later, he stood on the platform in Red Hollow, watching the afternoon train lumber in from the east, belching smoke and cinders across the dusty street. Silas had imagined this moment 100 times. He'd pictured someone small, maybe mousy, plain-faced and practical, as he'd requested, a woman grateful for the opportunity, willing to fade into the background of his life without demanding too much. The train hissed to a stop. Passengers emerged, a merchant with leather cases, a family with screaming children, 2 cowboys already drunk despite the hour. Then he saw her. She stood at the top of the steps, one hand gripping the rail, taking in the town with an expression Silas couldn't immediately read. She was young, mid-20s, he guessed, with dark hair pulled back severely and a green traveling dress that had seen better days. Dust coated her hem and sleeves, but it wasn't the dust or the dress that made people stare. She was heavy, not just plump or full-figured in the way people politely described women who'd never missed a meal. She was genuinely, visibly fat, broad-shouldered, thick-waisted, her body carrying weight that made the steps creak under her descent. Silas felt his chest tighten. Not from disgust, he wasn't a cruel man, but from shock. This wasn't what he'd expected. This wasn't what anyone expected. Rowan Hale reached the platform and set down her single battered trunk. She scanned the small crowd, and her eyes found his. She knew. Of course she knew. The only man standing alone, staring like he'd been hit with a plank. Mr. Mercer? Her voice was steady, educated, with an Eastern accent that hadn't yet been baked out by frontier sun. I'm Rowan Hale. He managed a nod. Ma'am. They stood there, 2 strangers who'd agreed to marry based on nothing but desperation and ink on paper. Around them, Red Hollow watched. Silas could feel the weight of it, the curiosity, the judgment, the whispers already forming. That's Mercer's mail-order bride? Lord help him. Poor bastard probably can't even send her back now. Wonder if she can ride a horse. Wonder if a horse could carry her. Rowan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Not hurt. She'd heard worse, Silas suspected. Something harder than hurt. Something that looked almost like defiance. The Reverend's expecting us, Silas said finally. If you're still willing. Are you? She asked it quietly, without accusation, but the question hung there like a blade. Silas thought about the ranch, about the cattle he couldn't round up alone, the fence line that needed repair, the supplies he couldn't afford to buy because he'd spent every spare dollar keeping the animals fed through last winter. He thought about the letter he'd written, must be strong, capable, willing to work, and realized he hadn't specified anything else because nothing else had seemed to matter. Yes, he said. Something in her shoulders loosened, just slightly. Then let's not keep the Reverend waiting. The ceremony took 11 minutes. Reverend Pritchard had performed it in his cramped office behind the church, with his wife as witness, and a Bible so worn the gilt had flaked off the cover. He'd stumbled over the vows twice, clearly uncomfortable, and pronounced them man and wife with an expression that suggested he was sealing a business contract rather than a marriage. which, Silas supposed, was exactly what this was. Rowan signed the certificate in neat, careful script. Her hand didn't shake. Silas signed below her name, and just like that, he had a wife again. Mrs. Pritchard offered tea. Rowan declined politely. They collected her trunk. Silas lifted it. It wasn't heavy, which told him everything about what she'd left behind, and walked to where his wagon waited outside the general store. The ride to the ranch took 90 minutes. They didn't speak. Silas kept his eyes on the road, hyper-aware of the woman beside him. She sat straight back despite the wagon's lurching, her hands folded in her lap, watching the landscape roll past. The land here was harsh, all red dirt and scrub brush and heat that pressed down like a physical weight. Not like the green east she'd left behind. "It's not much," he said finally, as the ranch came into view. "House needs work. Barn's solid, but the corrals could use mending. Creek runs year-round usually, but we're in drought now." "How many head?" Rowan asked. The question surprised him. Most women wouldn't have known to ask. 140. Should be 200, but I lost 60 last winter. Disease, cold, and some I just couldn't find when they wandered off. "Do you have help?" "Had a hand, kid named Jesse. He left for the silver mines last month." Rowan absorbed this silently. "So it's just you." "Just me. Now just us." The house wasn't impressive. A timber frame structure with a covered porch and 2 rooms plus a loft. Martha had called it cozy. Other people called it small. Silas helped Rowan down from the wagon, and she stood there looking at what was now her home, her face unreadable. "Bedroom's in the back," Silas said. "Kitchen shares the main room. There's a well out back and an outhouse past the barn. I'll sleep in the loft." She turned to him. "That's not necessary." "It is. You didn't come here for that. You came here for freedom. I aim to keep my word." For the first time, something soft crossed her face. Not quite gratitude, but close. "Thank you." He carried her trunk inside and left her to settle in. The sun was already dropping, painting everything orange and crimson, and there were still evening chores to finish. He fed the chickens, checked the horses, and hauled water from the well. By the time he came back inside, Rowan had changed into a simpler dress, brown, patched at the elbows, and was standing in the kitchen examining the cast-iron stove. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" she asked. Silas blinked. "I eat?" "That's not what I asked." He couldn't remember. "Been busy." "I can see that." She'd found his meager supplies, flour, salt pork, beans, a few wrinkled potatoes. "This won't do. Tomorrow I'll need to see what you have stored, and we'll need to make a list for town." "Town's expensive." "Starving's expensive too, Mr. Mercer. You can't work if you're too weak to stand." She had a point. Silas sat at the rough-hewn table and watched her work. Despite her size, she moved efficiently in the small space, her hands quick and practiced. Within an hour, she'd produced something that actually resembled supper: beans with bits of pork, potatoes fried in lard, biscuits that were only slightly burned. They ate in silence. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't hostile either. Just 2 people too exhausted for conversation, sharing a meal at the end of a very long day. "Tell me about the ranch," Rowan said finally, sopping up bean juice with a biscuit. "What needs doing most?" Silas hadn't expected her to ask. "Everything," he admitted. "But the priority's moving the herd to better grazing before they get too weak. Problem is, the good grass is near water, and the water's controlled by Rhett Crowley." "Who's Rhett Crowley?" "Trouble." Silas pushed his plate away. "He owns the big spread north of here, Triple Crown Ranch. Bought up most of the water rights in the valley, and he doesn't take kindly to small ranchers like me trying to use his resources." "But you have water rights too?" "On paper. In practice, Crowley's got men with guns, and I've got me." Rowan set down her biscuit. "He threatens you." "He threatens everyone. 3 ranchers have sold out to him in the last 2 years, way under value. Another one, Jim Hoskins, died under suspicious circumstances when he refused to sell. Sheriff ruled it an accident." "But you don't think it was?" "I know it wasn't." Silas met her eyes. "I'm not trying to scare you. You have a right to know what you've walked into. If you want to leave, I'm not leaving." She said it firmly. "I didn't come all this way to run at the first sign of hardship. I asked you what needed doing because I intend to help do it." "Ranch work is hard, Mrs. Mercer." "So I've been told. And it's Rowan." She stood, collecting their plates. I didn't leave one prison to live formally in another. That night, Silas lay in the loft, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person in his house. He heard Rowan moving around downstairs, the creak of the bed frame as she settled in. He thought about Martha, wondered what she would have made of this strange arrangement. Probably would have laughed at him. Martha had always been practical too, but Martha was gone. And Rowan Hale was here, solid and real and nothing like what he'd expected. He just hoped he hadn't brought her into something that would get them both killed. Rowan woke before dawn. Not because she wanted to, but because her body had been trained by years of rigid household schedules back east. The house was dark and cold, and for a disorienting moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then it came back. The train. The wedding. The ranch. She was in Wyoming now. Married to a stranger. Free. She dressed by feel, braided her hair, and emerged from the bedroom to find Silas already up, pulling on boots by lamplight. "Didn't mean to wake you," he said. "You didn't. I'm an early riser." She glanced at the cold stove. "I'll make coffee." I know you can. I'm offering to do it anyway." He studied her for a moment, then nodded and headed out to start the morning chores. Rowan got the stove going and put coffee on to boil. The routine felt strange, but also comforting. She'd spent her whole life in her father's house being told she was too much, too large, too opinionated, too resistant to his plans for her future. He'd wanted her married off to some business associate, tucked away where her size wouldn't embarrass him at social functions. Instead, she was here. In a tiny ranch house in the middle of nowhere, married to a man who'd asked for capability over beauty. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. Silas came back in as the sun started to rise, bringing cold air and the smell of horses with him. Rowan handed him coffee in a tin cup, and he took it gratefully. "You ride?" he asked. "Not well. I had lessons as a girl, but my father—" She trailed off. "But your father what?" He decided it was unladylike. Or perhaps just unflattering. "He stopped the lessons when I was 13. Silas's jaw tightened slightly. "Out here you'll need to ride. Not today, but soon. I'll teach you." "I'd appreciate that." They ate a quick breakfast, leftover biscuits and more coffee, and then Silas laid out the day's work. Checking fence lines, moving a portion of the herd to a new grazing area, repairing a section of barn roof that had come loose in the last storm. "What can I do?" Rowan asked. "You just got here. You should rest. Settle in." "I didn't come here to rest, Mr. Mercer." "Silas," he corrected, echoing her words from the night before. "If we're doing this, we're doing it honestly." "Fine. Silas, what can I do?" He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Chickens need tending. Gardens mostly dead from drought, but there might be something worth salvaging. Kitchen could use a proper cleaning. I haven't had time to do more than basics." It was make work, and they both knew it. The kind of tasks you gave someone to keep them busy and out of the way. But Rowan just nodded. "I'll start there. Tomorrow I want to learn the real work." "We'll see." He left, and Rowan spent the morning doing exactly what he'd suggested. Tending chickens, cleaning, checking the sad excuse for a garden. The work was easy, almost insulting in its simplicity. But she understood the logic. He didn't know what she was capable of yet. She'd have to prove herself. By afternoon, the house was cleaner than it had been in months, and Rowan was restless. She walked the property, getting a sense of the layout. The barn was indeed solid, though it needed mucking out. The corrals were functional, but crude. Beyond the immediate ranch buildings, the land stretched away in rolling hills broken by rocky outcroppings and sparse vegetation, beautiful in its harshness. She was standing by the corral, watching the horses, when hoofbeats approached from the north. 3 riders, moving at an easy pace. Rowan's stomach tightened instinctively. She didn't know these men, but something about the way they rode, confident, entitled, put her on edge. They saw her and changed direction, heading straight for the house. Rowan considered going inside, hiding. That's what she would have done back east, made herself invisible, let the men handle men's business. But this wasn't back east, and she was tired of hiding. She stayed where she was. The riders pulled up 20 feet away. The one in front was older, maybe 50, with silver in his beard and a black Stetson that looked expensive. His horse was beautiful, a glossy bay gelding worth more than everything on this ranch combined. "Well now," the man said, smiling without warmth, "you must be Mercer's new bride. Heard he'd sent east for one. Didn't quite picture—" He gestured vaguely at her. "This." The two men behind him chuckled. Rowan felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice level. "And you are?" "Rhett Crowley. I own the Triple Crown north of here. Just being neighborly, coming to welcome you to the valley." "That's kind of you." It wasn't kind. This was a threat disguised as courtesy, and they both knew it. Crowley's smile widened. "Ranch life's hard on a woman, especially one who's—" Another vague gesture. "Not used to physical labor. You might find yourself wishing you'd stayed back east where life's easier." "I assure you, Mr. Crowley, I'm quite capable of handling hard work." "That's so." He leaned forward in his saddle. "Thing is, Mrs. Mercer, this ranch of your husband's is hanging by a thread. Poor grazing, low water, debt piling up. Now, I've made Silas a fair offer to buy him out. More than fair, considering the state of things. But he's stubborn. Maybe you could talk sense into him, convince him to sell before things get worse." "And if things do get worse?" Crowley's expression didn't change, but something cold entered his eyes. "That'd be unfortunate. Accidents happen out here. Animals wander off, fences get cut, sometimes worse than that." He straightened. "You think on it. A smart woman looks after her own interests." He wheeled his horse around, and the three riders left as casually as they'd arrived, leaving dust and menace in their wake. Rowan stood there, hands shaking with anger more than fear. She'd been insulted her entire life, mocked for her appearance, dismissed as if her body made her worthless. But this was different. This wasn't just personal cruelty. This was danger. When Silas returned at sunset, she told him everything. He listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each sentence. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I should have warned you he might come by," he said finally. "Crowley likes to test people, see if he can intimidate them into selling. He threatened us. He threatens everyone. It's how he operates. And you just accept that?" Silas's jaw worked. "What would you have me do? Shoot him? I'd hang, report him to the sheriff? The sheriff's in his pocket. I do what I can, keep my head down, work hard, hope I can outlast him." "That's not a strategy. That's just waiting to lose. You got a better idea?" Rowan didn't. Not yet. But standing there in the dimming light, watching this man who'd been worn down by fighting alone, she made a decision. She hadn't come west to hide or to be another burden for someone else to carry. She'd come to build something different. "Teach me to ride," she said. "Teach me to shoot. Teach me everything I need to know to help you fight back." "Rowan, I mean it. Crowley looked at me today and saw someone he could dismiss, someone too weak or too afraid to matter. I'm done being dismissed. If we're going to survive this, I need to be useful, not just in the house, out there." Silas studied her face in the fading light. Whatever he saw there must have convinced him, because he nodded slowly. "All right, we start tomorrow. But I'm warning you, it won't be easy." "I know," Rowan said. "Nothing worth doing ever is." The first riding lesson nearly killed her. Not literally, though it felt that way at the time. Silas brought out a sturdy mare named Daisy, gentle, he said, good with beginners, and helped Rowan into the saddle. The stirrups had to be adjusted twice to accommodate her legs, and mounting itself was an undignified struggle that left her breathless and embarrassed. But she was on the horse. "Just walk her around the corral," Silas instructed. "Get used to the movement, how she responds to the reins." It seemed simple enough. It wasn't. Every step the mare took jarred through Rowan's body. Her thighs screamed within minutes, muscles unused to gripping pressed into service. The saddle cut into her hips in ways that would definitely leave bruises. Worse was the psychological weight, the constant awareness of her size, the fear that she was too heavy, that the horse was suffering, that she looked ridiculous. "You're too tense," Silas called. "Relax into the saddle." "I'm trying." "Try harder. The horse can feel your nervousness." Rowan wanted to snap at him but didn't have the breath. She focused on loosening her death grip on the reins, on finding some kind of rhythm with the mare's gait. By the time Silas called an end to the lesson, maybe 30 minutes, though it felt like hours, Rowan was shaking with exhaustion and relief. Dismounting was worse than mounting. Her legs nearly gave out when she hit the ground, and she had to grab the fence to keep from falling. "You did well," Silas said. "Don't lie." "I'm not. First time is always hardest. You stayed on, listened to instruction, and didn't give up. That's what matters." Rowan wanted to argue but found she didn't have the energy. She limped back to the house, every muscle protesting, and collapsed at the kitchen table. Her whole body hurt. Her pride hurt worse. This was going to be impossible. But the next morning, when Silas asked if she wanted to try again, she said yes. The days fell into a brutal routine. Rowan woke before dawn, made coffee and breakfast, then spent an hour or two on horseback while her body slowly, painfully, adapted to the demands being placed on it. Silas was patient but firm, never coddling her, treating her like any ranch hand who needed training. After riding came other lessons: how to handle cattle, mend fence, recognize signs of illness in livestock, shoot a rifle. The rifle was terrifying at first. The weight of it, the explosive crack of gunfire, the way it kicked against her shoulder hard enough to leave bruises. But Silas was a good teacher, breaking down each step until the fear transformed into focus. "Don't jerk the trigger," he said, standing behind her as she aimed at a row of bottles on the fence. "Squeeze it smooth, like you're trying not to wake it up." She fired. The bottle exploded in a shower of glass. "Better," Silas said, and Rowan felt a small, fierce surge of pride. But the work took its toll. Her hands blistered and bled until they finally calloused over. Her breathing grew labored during long rides, her lungs burning from exertion and the thin, dry air. The saddle bruised her hips and thighs in livid purple-yellow blooms that made sitting painful even when she wasn't riding. Some mornings she could barely drag herself out of bed, muscles screaming from the previous day's abuse. She never complained. Not once. The town, meanwhile, had opinions. Red Hollow was small enough that everyone knew everyone's business, and Silas Mercer's fat mail-order bride was too juicy a piece of gossip to ignore. Rowan heard the whispers on her second trip to town for supplies, saw the stares, the poorly concealed smirks, the way conversation stopped when she entered the general store. "That's her," someone murmured. "Can you imagine? Poor Mercer, ordering a wife and getting that. I heard she can barely ride, nearly broke a horse's back. Wonder how long before she gives up and goes home." Rowan kept her head high and bought supplies with hands that didn't shake, even though inside she wanted to disappear. She'd heard it all before, variations on the same cruel theme she'd lived with her entire life. But it still cut. It always cut. Silas, waiting with the wagon, saw her face when she emerged. "You all right?" "Fine." "Rowan?" "I said I'm fine." She climbed into the wagon seat with more force than necessary. "Let's go home." They rode in silence for a while, the town disappearing behind them in a cloud of dust. Finally, Silas spoke. "I heard what they said. In the store." Rowan's throat tightened. "Doesn't matter." "It does matter. You don't deserve that." "You think I don't know people talk?" She turned to face him. "I've been too fat my whole life, Silas. Too much. Too visible. People have been whispering about me since I was a child. I learned to live with it because what else could I do? Starve myself? Disappear? I tried both. Neither worked." "That's not chupashi." "What I need," Rowan interrupted, "is not your pity. I need you to keep teaching me how to be useful out here. That's the only thing that matters. Being capable enough that my body doesn't define me." Silas was quiet for a long moment. "Your body doesn't define you," he said finally. "Not to me. For what it's worth." It was worth more than he probably knew, but Rowan just nodded and turned her attention back to the road ahead. Bang! 3 weeks after her arrival, Crowley came back. This time he brought more men, 6 riders, all armed, all wearing the easy confidence of people who knew they had power. Rowan was in the barn when they arrived, helping Silas muck out stalls. She heard the hoofbeats, saw Silas's expression tighten. "Stay here," he said. "No." "Rowan, I said no." She set down her pitchfork and followed him outside. Crowley sat his horse in the center of the yard, smiling that same predatory smile. "Mercer, I was hoping we could talk business." "We've got nothing to talk about," Silas said evenly. Now don't be hasty. Crowley's gaze shifted to Rowan, standing just behind Silas's shoulder. Mrs. Mercer. Still here, I see. Thought you might have developed some sense by now. Mr. Crowley, Rowan said, her voice colder than she felt, if you've come to make another insulting offer, you've wasted your time. Insulting? Crowley's smile widened. I'm offering your husband a lifeline. This ranch is drowning, and you're too... He gestured at her again, that casual, dismissive wave. Too new to understand what that means, but let me explain it simply. You've got no money, no hands, no water access worth mentioning. Winter's coming, and you won't survive it. That's our concern, Silas said. It becomes my concern when dead cattle from your spread contaminate the whole valley, when your incompetence puts real ranchers at risk. Crowley leaned forward. I'm being generous here. Take the offer while it still stands, because I promise you, come winter, it won't be on the table anymore. Is that a threat? Rowan asked. It's reality, Mrs. Mercer. Cold, hard reality that doesn't care about your feelings. The men behind Crowley laughed. Not loudly, just enough to reinforce who had power here and who didn't. Rowan felt her hands clench into fists, nails digging into her palms. We're not selling, she said. Crowley's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. You should let your husband speak for himself. We're not selling, Silas echoed. Now get off my land. For a moment, the air felt electric, like a storm about to break. Rowan was acutely aware of the guns on the hips of Crowley's men, of how outnumbered they were, of how quickly this could turn violent. Then Crowley laughed, a short barking sound devoid of humor. Have it your way, but don't come crying to me when everything falls apart. And it will fall apart, Mercer, I promise you that. He wheeled his horse around, and the riders followed, leaving the same way they'd come, slowly, confidently, making sure their presence lingered like smoke. When they were gone, Rowan realized she was shaking. You shouldn't have confronted him, Silas said quietly. Someone had to. He's dangerous, Rowan. He's not just some East Coast bully you can stare down. I know that. She turned to face him. But I'm not going to cower every time he shows up either. Is that what you've been doing? Just taking his insults and threats? I've been surviving, Silas shot back. There's a difference between survival and stupidity. And there's a difference between caution and cowardice. The words came out harsher than she'd intended. Silas's face closed off, and he turned away without another word, heading back to the barn. Rowan stood there, watching him go, torn between regret and anger. She'd crossed a line, but maybe lines needed crossing. That evening, after a silent, tense dinner, Rowan brought up something she'd been thinking about for days. I want to learn to shoot better, she said, not just bottles, moving targets, real scenarios. Silas looked up from his coffee. Why? Because if Crowley comes back and things get ugly, I need to be able to defend myself, defend us. It won't come to that. You don't know that. And even if it doesn't, knowing I can handle a gun will make me less afraid. Right now I'm afraid. I hate it, but I am. I need to do something about it. Silas studied her for a long moment. All right, he said finally. Tomorrow, after the morning chores. We'll work on it. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might regret asking. But Rowan didn't regret it. Even when the advanced lessons left her arms aching and her ears ringing, even when she missed more shots than she hit, even when frustration brought tears she refused to let fall, she didn't regret it. Because every day she was becoming something more than the woman who'd stepped off that train. Not smaller, not quieter, but stronger, more capable, more free. And if Rhett Crowley or anyone else thought her body made her weak, they were in for a nasty surprise. The days grew shorter, the nights colder. Autumn was coming to the valley, and with it, the sense that something was about to break. Rowan could feel it in the air, in the way Silas watched the horizon, in the uneasy silence that seemed to settle over the ranch. Something was coming, and when it arrived, Rowan intended to be ready. The first snow came early that year, dusting the valley in white that melted by noon but left everyone uneasy. Winter was supposed to hold off until December, but here it was, the second week of November, and already the temperature was dropping at night to levels that made the horses skittish and the cattle bunched together for warmth. Rowan stood on the porch watching the last of the snow melt off the barn roof, a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. 6 weeks on the ranch now, and her body had changed in ways that had nothing to do with size. Her hands were rough, scarred from rope burns and calluses. Her face had taken on color from constant sun exposure despite her best efforts with a hat. The softness that came from a life spent indoors had been burned away, replaced by muscle that ached constantly but grew stronger each day. She could ride now. Not gracefully, she doubted she'd ever sit a horse with the ease Silas did, but competently. She could stay in the saddle for hours, could guide her mare through rough terrain without panicking, could even manage a controlled gallop when needed. The bruises on her hips had faded and faded again so many times she'd stopped noticing them. The rifle was starting to feel less like a foreign object and more like an extension of her arms. 2 days ago, she'd hit a prairie dog at 50 yards on her second shot. Silas hadn't said much, just nodded in that economical way he had when he approved of something. But she'd seen the flicker of respect in his eyes. "You planning to stand there all day?" Silas emerged from the house, carrying 2 tin cups of coffee. He handed her one and leaned against the porch rail beside her. "Just thinking," Rowan said. "About?" "Winter. Whether we have enough feed stored, whether the roof will hold if we get heavy snow, whether Crowley will make good on his threats, or just keep circling like a vulture." Silas took a long drink of coffee. "You sound like a rancher." "I am a rancher, or trying to be." "You're doing more than trying." He was quiet for a moment, watching the same horizon she'd been staring at. "I didn't think you'd last a week." "I know. I was wrong." It wasn't an apology exactly, but coming from Silas, it might as well have been a speech. Rowan felt warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee spread through her chest. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. You did the work." He pushed off the rail. "Come on, we need to move the herd closer to the winter pasture before the weather turns again." Moving cattle was exactly as miserable as it sounded. The animals were stubborn, prone to wandering off in directions that made no sense, and utterly indifferent to human urgency. Rowan and Silas spent 8 hours in the saddle, riding back and forth along the edges of the herd, turning back strays, shouting themselves hoarse, trying to keep 140 head of beef moving in approximately the same direction. By the time they got the last of them through the gate into the winter pasture, the sun was setting and Rowan was so tired she could barely think straight. Her throat was raw from yelling, her legs felt like they might give out, and she was fairly certain she'd discovered new muscles just so they could hurt. "Good work," Silas said, closing the gate behind the last cow. He looked as exhausted as she felt, his face streaked with dust and sweat despite the cold. "Do we have to do that often?" Rowan asked. "Every time we move them. Couple times a month, usually." "I'm gonna die." "Probably not." The corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. "But you'll wish you were dead every time." They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, the kind that had started developing between them lately. Not friendship exactly. They were still too careful with each other for that, still learning the edges of this strange arrangement they'd entered into. But something close to partnership. Something that felt, against all odds, like it might actually work. The house was cold when they got back, the fire in the stove having died hours ago. Rowan got it going again while Silas tended the horses, and by the time he came back inside, she had beans warming and the last of the bread sliced thin to make it stretch another day. "We need supplies," she said, not looking up from the stove. "Flour's almost gone, salt pork's down to the last few pieces, and we're out of coffee after tomorrow." "Town trip then. Saturday? I can go alone if you want. You've got fence repairs to finish." Silas shook his head. "Not safe. Crowley's men sometimes hang around Red Hollow looking for trouble. I'll come with you." Rowan wanted to argue that she could handle herself, but the truth was she'd be relieved to have him along. The town made her nervous in ways the ranch didn't. Out here, she could fail privately. In Red Hollow, every mistake was public spectacle. They ate dinner, washed up, and sat in the main room with the stove radiating heat against the growing cold. Silas had a tally book out, working through numbers that clearly didn't add up the way he wanted. Rowan mended a shirt with a tear in the sleeve, her stitches clumsy but functional. "How bad is it?" she asked finally. Silas didn't pretend not to understand. "Bad. We lost too many head last winter, and I haven't been able to build the herd back up. Prices are down this year, too. Even if we get everyone through to spring healthy, I'll barely break even." "What about Crowley's offer? How much was he actually willing to pay?" "About half what the land's worth, maybe less." So selling isn't really an option. Not unless we want to walk away with nothing. He set down his pencil and rubbed his eyes. I keep thinking if Martha was here, she'd know what to do. She always had ideas, solutions I couldn't see. It was the first time he'd mentioned his late wife directly. Rowan kept her hands busy with the mending, giving him space to talk or not talk. How long has she been gone? She asked carefully. 3 years this January. Fever took her fast. 1 week she was fine, the next she was gone. His voice was flat, the way people sounded when they'd told a story too many times. We'd been married 8 years. She was the one who wanted the ranch, convinced me to come west. Said we'd build something that mattered. You did build something. She built it. I just kept it running after she died. Barely. He looked at Rowan then, really looked at her. I'm sorry. For what? For bringing you into this mess. You answered my advertisement thinking you'd have a real home, a real marriage, and instead you got a failing ranch and a husband who can't even afford proper supplies. Stop. Rowan set down the shirt. I didn't come here for comfort, Silas. I came here to escape. My father was arranging a marriage to a man 3 times my age who wanted me because I'd be easy to control. He thought my weight made me desperate enough to accept anything. So yes, I answered your advertisement. And yes, this is hard. But it's mine. I'm making my own choices, doing work that matters. That's worth more than any amount of comfort. Silas held her gaze for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, a wall coming down by small degrees. You're nothing like I expected, he said quietly. Neither are you. They sat there in the firelight, 2 broken people who'd found each other by accident, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Rowan let herself think that maybe this could be more than just survival. Maybe it could be something good. Saturday came cold and gray, the sky threatening snow that hadn't quite made up its mind to fall. Rowan dressed in her warmest clothes and climbed up onto the wagon beside Silas, a shopping list tucked in her pocket and a knot of anxiety in her stomach. You all right? Silas asked as they set off. Fine, just don't like going to town. Because of the talk? Because people are cruel when they think you can't hear them, sometimes even when they know you can. Silas's hands tightened on the reins. If anyone says something to you, I'll handle it, Rowan interrupted. I've been handling it my whole life. But she appreciated the protective impulse, even if she couldn't afford to rely on it. Red Hollow was busier than usual, the impending winter having drawn people from surrounding ranches to stock up on supplies. The general store was crowded, and Rowan felt every eye turn to her when she walked in. The conversations didn't stop this time. They'd all had 6 weeks to get used to the novelty of her presence. But the weight of judgment was still there, heavy as a physical thing. She moved through the store systematically, gathering flour, salt, coffee, a few precious cans of peaches that cost more than they should, but would be a treat come February. The proprietor, a thin man named Hastings, tallied everything up with the expression of someone doing unpleasant but necessary work. That'll be $18.40, he said. Silas counted out the money carefully, and Rowan saw how little was left in his wallet afterward. They were cutting this close, closer than she'd realized. Oh, Mrs. Mercer, Hastings said as they turned to leave. There's a ladies' social next week at the church. You'd be welcome to attend. It was said kindly enough, but Rowan caught the sideways glance from another customer, the poorly hidden smirk. The invitation wasn't genuine, it was a test, a way to see if she'd embarrass herself by actually showing up. Thank you, Rowan said evenly. I'll consider it. Outside, loading supplies into the wagon, she let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. You should go, Silas said, to the social. Why? So they can talk about me to my face instead of behind my back? So you can show them you're not afraid of them. Rowan secured the last sack of flour and turned to face him. I'm afraid of them. That's the problem. Not because they'll hurt me physically, but because after a lifetime of being told I'm wrong, broken, too much, part of me still believes it. And I hate that part. I hate that they still have that power. Silas reached out and after a moment's hesitation, put a hand on her shoulder. It was the first time he'd touched her beyond helping her on and off horses, and the contact was awkward but genuine. Then prove that part wrong, not for them, for you. Before Rowan could respond, a voice cut across the street. Well, Mercer. They both turned. Crowley was standing outside the saloon, flanked by two of his men. He looked relaxed, confident, a man who owned the world and knew it. "Crowley," Silas said neutrally. "Stocking up for winter, I see. Smart. Though I wonder if you'll live long enough to use those supplies." He smiled. "Had some interesting news this morning. Seems there's been cattle going missing from ranches on the south end of the valley. Sheriff thinks it might be rustlers." "That have anything to do with us?" Silas asked. "Only that rustlers tend to target weak operations. Places without enough hands to watch the herd properly. Places like yours." Crowley's gaze shifted to Rowan. "Must be stressful, Mrs. Mercer, trying to keep a dying ranch alive with just you and your husband. If anything happened, if some of your cattle disappeared or worse, well, that'd be the end, wouldn't it?" "Is that a threat?" Rowan asked, echoing the question she'd asked weeks ago. "It's concern," Crowley said smoothly. "Neighborly concern. See, if something happened to the Mercer Ranch, you'd have nowhere to go. Except, of course, if your husband had already sold to me. Then at least you'd have money to start over somewhere else. Somewhere easier. Somewhere more suited to a woman of your—" He paused. "Limitations." Silas took a step forward, but Rowan put a hand on his arm, stopping him. "Mr. Crowley," she said, her voice carrying across the street clearly enough that several people stopped to listen. "I appreciate your concern, but I have no limitations beyond the ones cowards try to impose on me. My husband's ranch will survive this winter and every winter after, and if rustlers do come calling, they'll find we're better prepared than they expect." For just a second, genuine surprise crossed Crowley's face. Then his expression hardened. "Brave words from someone who can barely sit a horse." "I sit a horse just fine. I also shoot just fine. Perhaps you'd like a demonstration?" "Rowan," Silas said quietly, warning in his voice. But Crowley was laughing now, a sound without humor. "I'll give you credit for spirit. But spirit doesn't stop bullets, and it doesn't stop winter, and it sure as hell doesn't stop men who know how to take what they want." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Enjoy your supplies while they last." He walked away, his men following, and the small crowd that had gathered dispersed slowly, whispering among themselves. "You shouldn't have provoked him," Silas said once they were alone. "Someone needs to stand up to him. Standing up to him gets people killed. Cowering gets them ruined anyway." Rowan climbed onto the wagon seat. "At least if we fight, we go down fighting." They rode home in tense silence, and Rowan spent the journey staring at the landscape rolling past, her mind racing. Crowley wasn't going to stop. He'd made that clear. The question was what he'd do next, and whether they'd survive it. That night, after a quiet dinner where neither of them seemed to have much appetite, Silas pulled out a gun belt and a pistol Rowan hadn't seen before. "What's that?" she asked. "My old sidearm. Haven't worn it in years, but I think it's time to start again." He checked the cylinder, loaded it methodically. "I want you armed too. The rifle's good for distance, but if someone comes at you close, you need something faster." "You really think it'll come to that?" "I think Crowley's done with warnings. What he said today about rustlers, that wasn't concern. That was a promise." A chill ran through Rowan that had nothing to do with the temperature. "So what do we do?" "We prepare. We watch. And we don't go anywhere alone." He held out a smaller revolver, lighter than his but still deadly serious. "You know how to use one of these? You're going to teach me." So he did. They spent the next hour in the cold dark outside, Silas showing her how to draw, aim, and fire the pistol with speed and accuracy. It was different from the rifle, more immediate, more personal. The weight of it on her hip felt strange, but also oddly reassuring. "Don't hesitate," Silas told her. "If someone threatens you, if you feel in danger, you draw and you shoot. Hesitation gets you killed." "I understand. I mean it, Rowan. Out here you can't afford to be polite or to wait for someone else to save you. You have to save yourself." She met his eyes in the lamplight. "I know. I've always known." Over the next week, the temperature continued to drop, and with it, the tension on the ranch ratcheted higher. Silas became hypervigilant, checking on the cattle twice a day instead of once, riding the fence line looking for breaks or signs of tampering. He wore his gun belt everywhere now, and Rowan did the same, the weight of the pistol becoming familiar against her hip. They moved the herd even closer to the house, condensing them into a smaller pasture where they could be watched more easily. It meant more work feeding them, hauling hay from the barn twice daily, but it also meant they were harder to steal without being noticed. "You think Crowley will actually do it?" Rowan asked one evening as they scattered hay for the cattle. "Send men to steal from us? I think he'll do whatever it takes to force us out," Silas said. "Theft, sabotage. Maybe worse. He's done it before to other ranchers." "Then why doesn't anyone stop him? Why doesn't the sheriff—" "The sheriff works for him. So do half the businessmen in Red Hollow. Crowley's got money and influence, and out here that's as good as law." Silas pitched another armful of hay over the fence. "That's why most people just sell and leave. It's easier than fighting." "But you didn't sell." "Martha wouldn't have wanted me to. She poured everything into this place, her dreams, her work, her life. Giving it up to a man like Crowley would dishonor her memory." He paused. "That probably sounds stupid." "It doesn't," Rowan said quietly. "It sounds like love." They worked in silence for a while, the cattle lowing softly as they ate, steam rising from their breath in the cold air. Rowan thought about love, about loss, about the different ways people held on to the things that mattered to them. Silas was holding on to his wife's dream. What was she holding on to? Freedom, she'd thought, the right to make her own choices. But maybe it was more than that now. Maybe it was also this, the land, the work, the precarious life they were building together against impossible odds. The attack came 3 nights later. Rowan woke to the sound of cattle bellowing in panic and Silas already out of bed, pulling on boots and grabbing his rifle. "Stay here," he ordered, heading for the door. Rowan ignored him. She dressed in 30 seconds flat, grabbed her own rifle and the pistol, and followed him outside. The scene was chaos. Dark figures on horseback were circling the herd, driving the cattle toward the open gate someone had cut in the fence. The animals were panicking, running in all directions, and in the darkness it was impossible to tell how many— "No." She stood on legs that felt like water. "How many did they take?" Silas was already counting, his face grim in the moonlight. 20, maybe 25, maybe more. Hard to tell in the dark. 25 head. At current prices, that was close to $500, money they desperately needed and couldn't afford to lose. Rowan felt rage surge through her, burning away the fear. "We go after them." "It's too dark. We'd never track them, and we'd probably ride straight into an ambush." "So we just let them steal from us?" "We wait until dawn. Then we track them, and we see where they took the cattle." Silas's jaw was tight. "And then we make them pay." They spent the rest of the night on watch, taking turns while the other dozed fitfully by the fire with a rifle across their lap. When dawn finally broke cold and gray, they saddled up immediately. The trail wasn't hard to follow. 25 head of cattle left obvious tracks, and the rustlers hadn't bothered trying to hide them. Why would they? They knew Silas was one man with a new wife who could barely ride. They expected no real resistance. They were wrong. Rowan and Silas followed the trail northwest, into broken country full of ravines and rocky outcroppings. The tracks led toward a narrow canyon Rowan didn't recognize, and Silas pulled up short. "This is Crowley's land," he said quietly. "You're sure?" "Positive. The boundary runs along that ridgeline," he pointed. "If they took the cattle through there, they're probably holding them in one of the box canyons on the other side." "So what do we do?" Silas was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the decision. "We go back," he said finally. "We ride to the neighboring ranches, get help. Bring enough men that Crowley can't just shoot us and claim self-defense. That'll take all day. By then, the cattle could be scattered, rebranded, sold. We'll never prove they're ours. Better than getting killed trying to take them back ourselves." Rowan looked at the trail disappearing into the canyon, then at Silas. She thought about Crowley's smug face, his casual threats, the way he'd looked at her like she was nothing. She thought about the ranch, about winter coming, about the supplies they couldn't afford to replace if they lost the money those cattle represented. "You go get help," she said. "I'll follow them, see where they're keeping the herd. I won't engage, just scout. When you come back with the others, I can lead you straight there." "Absolutely not." "Silas, I said no. It's too dangerous." "Everything's dangerous," Rowan shot back. "But we can't afford to lose this. You know that as well as I do." They stared at each other, neither backing down. Finally, Silas swore under his breath. You stay out of sight. You don't do anything stupid. If they spot you, you run. Promise me." "I promise." "I mean it, Rowan." "So do I." She checked her rifle, made sure the pistol was secure on her hip. "Go. The faster you get help, the faster this ends." Silas looked like he wanted to argue more, but time was wasting. "Be careful," he said, then turned his horse and galloped back the way they'd come. Rowan waited until he was out of sight, then urged her mare forward into the canyon. The trail wound through narrow passages between red rock walls that seemed to lean in oppressively. Rowan kept her mare to a walk, moving as quietly as possible, every sense alert for danger. The tracks were fresh. She was maybe an hour behind the rustlers, maybe less. The canyon opened into a wider area, and Rowan pulled up, scanning the landscape. There, in a box canyon about a quarter-mile ahead, she could see cattle milling around. Her cattle. And 3 men on horseback, keeping watch. She dismounted, tied her horse to a scrub pine, and moved forward on foot, using the rocks for cover. The closer she got, the better she could see. The cattle still wore Silas's brand. The men were armed, but not particularly alert. They clearly didn't expect company. One of them was saying something to the others, and they laughed. Rowan couldn't hear the words, but the casual cruelty in that laughter made her blood boil. She should have turned back then, should have waited for Silas and reinforcements like she'd promised. But she was so tired of being pushed around, dismissed, threatened, so tired of men like Crowley taking whatever they wanted while people like her and Silas just had to accept it. Without really planning it, Rowan stood up from behind her cover and raised her rifle. "You're on the wrong side of the property line with stolen cattle," she called out, her voice carrying across the space between them. "I suggest you ride away and leave them here." The 3 men spun around, reaching for their guns. For a second, nobody moved. Then one of them, young, maybe 20, with a patchy beard, started laughing. "You gonna shoot us, lady?" "If I have to." "You're alone out here, fat, alone, and stupid. You really think you're walking away from this?" He drew his pistol. Rowan fired. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him halfway around. He screamed, dropped his gun, and fell off his horse. The other 2 men scattered, diving for cover behind rocks and drawing their own weapons. And then everything went to hell. Bullets ricocheted off stone, whining past her head close enough to make her ears ring. Rowan threw herself behind a boulder, her heart hammering, her hands slick with sweat despite the cold. What had she done? What the hell had she been thinking? She returned fire blindly, not aiming, just trying to keep the men pinned down. Her rifle cracked again and again, the recoil bruising her shoulder, brass casings ejecting to clink against stone. "You're dead," one of the men shouted. "You're dead, you fat bitch!" More shots. A bullet hit the rock inches from her head, showering her with stone chips. Another punched through the brim of her hat. Rowan's breath came in gasps, panic clawing at her throat. She was going to die out here. She'd been stupid and impulsive, and now she was going to die. But she kept shooting. Time lost meaning. The fight could have lasted 5 minutes or 50. Rowan couldn't tell. Her rifle ran dry, and she dropped it, drew the pistol, kept firing. One of the rustlers tried to circle around her position, and she put 2 rounds near his feet, driving him back. The wounded man was screaming for help. The cattle were bellowing in panic. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses coming fast. For a terrible moment, she thought it was more of Crowley's men. Then Silas's voice cut through the chaos. "Rowan, get down!" She dropped flat as gunfire erupted from the canyon entrance. Silas had returned, and he'd brought help. She could hear multiple rifles now, a proper volley that had the rustlers abandoning their positions and running for their horses. It was over in seconds. 2 of the men galloped away, the wounded one left behind clutching his shoulder and cursing. The cattle milled around confused, but they were there, alive, still wearing Silas's brand. Silas dismounted before his horse even stopped moving, crossing to where Rowan lay behind her rock. His face was white with fury and fear. "Are you hurt?" "No." "What the hell were you thinking?" "I don't know." She was shaking now, the adrenaline draining away and leaving her weak. I couldn't let them get away with it. You could have been killed." He grabbed her shoulders, and she realized his hands were shaking too. "You promised you'd stay out of sight. You promised." "I know. I'm sorry." He pulled her close then, crushing her against his chest in an embrace that was more relief than affection. Rowan's face pressed into his shoulder, and she felt tears she'd been holding back finally break free. Don't ever do that again, Silas said roughly. Don't you ever do that again. Okay, she whispered. Okay. The other men, 4 neighboring ranchers who'd agreed to help, were securing the wounded rustler and gathering the scattered cattle. One of them, an older man named Dutch Kearney, approached with a grim expression. This one's talking, he said, jerking a thumb at the wounded rustler. Says Crowley hired them, promised them $50 to run off Mercer's herd and make it look like regular rustling. Silas released Rowan and turned to face Kearney. He'll testify to that? If it means avoiding a rope, probably. Then we take him to the sheriff. Sheriff won't do anything, another rancher put in. He's Crowley's man. Maybe, Silas said, but we make it official anyway. We file a complaint, get it on record, and we spread the word about what Crowley's doing. Make it public enough that he can't just brush it aside. The men exchanged glances. Finally, Kearney nodded. All right, we'll back you on this. Crowley's been pushing at all of us. Maybe it's time someone pushed back. They spent the next hour rounding up the cattle and securing the prisoner. Rowan helped despite her exhaustion, her body running on fumes and stubbornness. By the time they got everything organized and started the drive back toward civilization, the sun was high overhead, and she could barely keep her eyes open. Silas rode beside her close enough that their stirrups nearly touched. He hadn't said much since the initial confrontation, but his presence was steady, solid, protective. Thank you, Rowan said finally, for coming back so fast. I shouldn't have left you, Silas replied. The second I rode away, I knew it was a mistake. So I went to the nearest ranch, grabbed Kearney and whoever else would come and rode back hard. He paused. When I heard the shots, when I thought you might be... He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. I'm all right, Rowan said. We're all right. They got the cattle back to the ranch by late afternoon, penned them securely, and then Silas, Kearney, and 2 others took the wounded rustler to Red Hollow. Rowan wanted to go, but Silas insisted she stay behind and rest. For once, she didn't argue. She was too tired. She collapsed into bed fully clothed and slept dreamlessly until long after dark. When she woke, Silas was sitting at the kitchen table staring at nothing, a glass of whiskey untouched in front of him. What happened? Rowan asked, her voice rough with sleep. Sheriff took the report, took the prisoner, said he'd investigate. Silas's tone made it clear what he thought of that promise. But word's spreading. By tomorrow, everyone in the valley will know Crowley tried to steal my cattle and got caught. Will that matter? Maybe. Public opinion's not law, but it's something. He finally looked at her. You should have seen Crowley's face when I walked into the sheriff's office with that rustler. He was there, claiming he'd heard about the trouble and wanted to help. When he realized we had one of his hired men and that the man was talking, he looked like he'd swallowed poison. Good, Rowan said with feeling. He made threats. Not direct ones. He's too smart for that. But threats all the same, said things were getting dangerous in the valley, implied we should think about our safety. Let him threaten. We beat him once. We'll beat him again. Silas gave her a long, searching look. You really believe that? I have to, Rowan said. The alternative is giving up, and I didn't come this far to give up now. Something in his expression softened. No, he said quietly. I don't suppose you did. They sat together in the lamplight, 2 people who'd started as strangers and were becoming something more. Partners in this fight, whatever the cost. Outside, winter crept closer, and somewhere in the darkness, Rhett Crowley was no doubt planning his next move. But for now, tonight, they'd won. They'd stood their ground and survived. It would have to be enough. The valley changed after that day, though not in ways Rowan had expected. Word of the rustling attempt spread through Red Hollow like wildfire. And with it, 2 competing narratives. Some people, Crowley's allies and those too afraid to cross him, claimed the whole thing was exaggerated, that Silas Mercer had probably staged it for sympathy. But others, the ones who'd been living under Crowley's shadow for years, started asking questions they'd been too scared to voice before. Dutch Kearney came by 4 days later with 2 other ranchers Rowan hadn't met, a lean, weathered man named Tom Briggs and his younger brother Samuel. They sat around the kitchen table drinking coffee that Rowan had stretched by adding chicory, their faces serious. Crowley's been quiet since the incident, Dutch said. Too quiet. Man like that doesn't just back down. I know, Silas replied. I've been expecting retaliation. That's why we're here. Tom Briggs leaned forward, his rough hands wrapped around his coffee cup. Sam and we've been talking to the other small ranchers. Folks are scared, but they're also angry. Crowley's been squeezing everyone for years, and now that someone finally stood up to him, people are starting to think maybe they don't have to just take it. What are you suggesting? Rowan asked. An alliance, Samuel said. He was younger than his brother, maybe 30, with an earnest face that made him look even younger. Nothing fancy, just an agreement that if Crowley comes after any of us, the others help. Safety in numbers. Silas was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in slow circles. That sounds good in theory, but when bullets start flying, theories don't mean much. People have families, lives they're trying to protect. Hard to blame them for choosing survival over solidarity. Maybe, Dutch said, but I've been ranching this valley for 20 years, and I'm tired of being afraid. I figure if we don't stand together now, we'll fall separately anyway. At least this way, we go down fighting. How many are willing to commit? Rowan asked. 6 ranches so far, including yours. Maybe more if we can convince them. Tom pulled a folded paper from his pocket and spread it on the table. It was a rough map of the valley with properties marked. If we coordinate patrols, share information about Crowley's movements, and respond as a group when someone's threatened, we might actually have a chance. Rowan studied the map, her mind working through the logistics. We'd need a way to communicate fast. If something happens, we can't wait hours for word to spread. Signal fires, Samuel suggested. Set up posts on high ground. Light a fire. Everyone knows there's trouble. That could work, Silas said slowly. But it also tips our hand. Crowley will know we're organized. Let him know, Dutch said, his voice hard. Maybe if he understands we're not isolated anymore, he'll think twice before starting something he can't finish. They spent the next 2 hours working out details, patrol schedules, signal locations, which ranchers would cover which sections of territory. It was crude and full of holes, but it was something. When the men finally left, Rowan felt a cautious hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. You think it'll work? She asked Silas as they watched the 3 riders disappear down the trail. I think it's our best shot, he said. Doesn't mean it's a good shot, but it's what we've got. That night, lying in her bed staring at the ceiling, Rowan thought about Dutch's words. At least this way we go down fighting. It wasn't exactly inspiring, but it was honest. And honesty was something she'd learned to value out here, where pretty lies got you killed. The first test of their alliance came sooner than anyone expected. 5 days after the meeting, smoke appeared on the northern horizon just after dawn. Not the thin gray of a cooking fire, but thick black smoke that could only mean something big was burning. Silas saw it first and immediately started saddling horses. That's the Briggs place, he said, his voice tight. Has to be. Rowan was already moving, grabbing rifles and ammunition, her hands steady despite the fear churning in her gut. They'd practiced this scenario, talked through what they'd do if the signal came. Now it was real. They rode hard, covering the 5 miles to the Briggs Ranch in under 30 minutes. 2 other ranchers arrived at the same time, Dutch and a younger man named Coleman. What they found made Rowan's stomach turn. The barn was engulfed in flames, the fire so intense they could feel the heat from 100 yards away. Tom and Samuel were trying to save what livestock they could, driving panicked horses out of the corral while their ranch hands worked a bucket brigade that was accomplishing exactly nothing against the inferno. What happened? Silas shouted over the roar of the fire. Riders came through before dawn, Tom said, his face streaked with soot and ash. 4 of them. Threw torches and rode off laughing. By the time we woke up, half the barn was gone. You see who they were? Too dark. But I know who sent them. They all knew. This was Crowley's answer to their alliance, a message written in fire and smoke. The barn couldn't be saved. They focused on keeping the fire from spreading to the house, soaking the walls and roof with water from the well until finally, mercifully, the flames started to die down. By mid-morning, it was over, leaving nothing but a blackened skeleton and the acrid smell of destruction. Tom Briggs stood looking at the ruins, his face expressionless in that way people got when emotion was too big to show. His wife Sarah appeared from the house carrying coffee, her hands shaking but her spine straight. We lost 12 tons of hay, Tom said quietly. All our winter feed. Tools, tack, everything stored in there. Insurance won't cover deliberate arson, assuming I could even prove it. We'll help, Dutch said immediately. Every ranch contributes what we can spare. You won't go into winter empty. I can't ask that. You're not asking, we're offering. Silas put a hand on Tom's shoulder. That's what this alliance means. We stand together. Rowan saw tears in Sarah Briggs's eyes, quickly blinked away. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They spent the rest of the day helping clean up the worst of the mess and securing the property. As they worked, Rowan noticed Samuel talking quietly with Silas off to the side, their expressions serious. When they finished, Silas came over to where she was hauling charred wood. Sam wants to ride to Red Hollow, file a report with the sheriff, he said. I told him it probably won't do any good, but he wants to try anyway. Maybe he's right. Maybe if we keep reporting everything, eventually someone will have to pay attention. Or Crowley will just get bolder, knowing the law won't touch him. Silas wiped sweat and soot from his forehead. Either way, this is going to get worse before it gets better. He was right. Over the next 3 weeks, the attacks escalated. Fences were cut on Coleman's ranch, letting his cattle scatter across 20 miles of open range. Someone poisoned the well on the Murphy property, forcing them to haul water from a creek 2 miles away. Dutch Kearney found 3 of his steers shot and left to rot, too far from the house for him to have heard the gunfire. Each time, the alliance responded. They helped round up Coleman's cattle, dug a new well for the Murphys, sat watch on each other's properties through long, cold nights. But it was exhausting, both physically and mentally. Winter was closing in, and instead of preparing for it properly, they were constantly reacting to Crowley's attacks. The stress showed on everyone. Tempers ran short. At a meeting 2 weeks after the barn burning, Tom and Coleman nearly came to blows over whose property should get priority for patrols. My place is most exposed, Coleman argued. I'm right on Crowley's border. And I just lost my barn, Tom shot back. You think he won't hit me again? Both of you shut up, Dutch snapped. Fighting each other is exactly what Crowley wants. We stick to the rotation, we cover everyone equally, and we don't let him divide us. Understood? Grudging nods all around, but Rowan could see the cracks forming. Fear and exhaustion were wearing them down, exactly as Crowley intended. She said as much to Silas on the ride home that evening. We can't keep playing defense. We're going to lose people. What would you suggest? We don't have enough men or guns to go after Crowley directly. No, but we have something he doesn't. What's that? The truth, and people who listen to it. Rowan had been thinking about this for days, turning it over in her mind. Crowley's power comes from fear and isolation. He keeps people scared and separated so they won't band together against him. But we've already started to break that pattern. What if we take it further? How? We make this public. Really public. Not just filing reports with a corrupt sheriff, but telling our story to everyone who'll listen. The newspaper, people passing through, neighboring towns. Make it impossible for Crowley to operate in the shadows. Silas was quiet for a long moment, his horse's hooves clopping steadily against the frozen ground. That could work, he said finally, or it could paint an even bigger target on our backs. We already have a target on our backs, Rowan pointed out. At least this way we're doing something other than waiting to be picked off one by one. They brought the idea to the group at the next meeting. The response was mixed. Red Hollow Gazette is practically Crowley's mouthpiece, Tom said. Editors too afraid to print anything critical. Then we go to Silver Creek or Bridgeton, papers outside Crowley's immediate influence, Rowan countered. And we don't just tell one story, we tell all of them. Every ranch he's pressured, every suspicious death, every piece of stolen property. We build a case so comprehensive that ignoring it becomes impossible. You really think that'll stop him? Samuel asked. I think it'll make him a lot more careful, Dutch said slowly. Public scrutiny is a powerful thing. Might not stop him completely, but it'll limit what he can get away with. It's also dangerous, Silas added. Whoever takes this to the papers will be putting themselves directly in Crowley's crosshairs. He won't take kindly to being exposed. Then I'll do it, Rowan said. Every head turned to look at her. Silas's face went carefully blank in that way he had when he was holding back strong emotion. Absolutely not, he said. Why not? I'm the newest here. I don't have years of history making me afraid. And Crowley already hates me. Might as well give him a good reason. That's exactly why you shouldn't do it. You're still learning this life. You don't understand how vicious he can be. I shot one of his men, Rowan said flatly. I think I understand just fine. Rowan, she's right, Dutch interrupted. Not that she should do it alone, but that it needs doing. And honestly, having a woman tell the story might work in our favor. Harder for Crowley to intimidate or threaten without looking like a coward. Unless he decides looking like a coward is better than looking weak and just has her killed, Silas snapped. The room went quiet. Sarah Briggs, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. I'll go with her. 2 of us together, both ranch wives who've seen what Crowley does. That's even harder to dismiss or threaten. Sarah, you don't have to, Tom started. Yes, I do. He burned our barn. He's terrorizing our friends. Someone has to stand up, and I'm tired of being afraid. She looked at Rowan. If you're willing, so am I. Rowan felt a surge of gratitude and respect for this woman she barely knew. Together, then. Silas looked like he wanted to argue more, but Dutch cut him off. It's decided. Rowan and Sarah go to the newspapers, tell the story, bring back whatever support they can get. The rest of us keep the ranches secure and watch each other's backs. Any objections? There were plenty of objections written on Silas's face, but he swallowed them. Fine. But I'm riding with them as far as Silver Creek. They don't make that trip unprotected. Agreed, Dutch said. We leave in 3 days. That gives us time to compile everything we want included. Dates, incidents, witnesses. Make it airtight. The meeting broke up shortly after, and the ride home was tense. Silas didn't speak until they were almost back at the ranch. You don't have to do this, he said finally. Yes, I do. Why? You could stay here. Stay safe. Let someone else take the risk. Rowan turned in her saddle to face him. Because I'm tired of people like Crowley deciding who matters and who doesn't. He looked at me and saw someone he could dismiss. Too fat, too female, too new to count. And maybe I was those things when I arrived, but I'm not anymore. I can ride, I can shoot, I can work, and I can sure as hell tell a story that needs telling. I'm not doubting your ability, Silas said quietly. I'm worried about losing you. The admission hung in the air between them, surprisingly vulnerable for a man who held his emotions close. Rowan felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the cold evening. You won't lose me, she said. I'm not that easy to get rid of. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise. But Silas, I need you to understand something. I didn't come west to hide behind someone else. I came to be free. And freedom means choosing to fight, even when it's dangerous. He nodded slowly, and though worry still lined his face, there was also something else. Pride, maybe, or respect. Martha would have liked you, he said suddenly. She had that same stubborn streak, that same refusal to back down when she believed in something. It was the first time he'd compared her to his late wife, and Rowan didn't quite know how to respond. I wish I could have known her. She would have liked that too. He paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Even with everything that's happening, even with Crowley breathing down our necks. I'm glad it's you beside me. Rowan's throat tightened. So am I. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Rowan let herself acknowledge what she'd been trying to ignore. She was falling in love with her husband, with his quiet strength, his stubborn honor, the way he treated her like an equal even when it scared him. It wasn't the romantic love she'd read about in books. It was earthier than that, built on shared work and mutual respect, and the gradual erosion of walls they'd both built around their hearts. She didn't tell him. The words felt too big, too complicated for the moment. But she thought maybe he knew anyway. The 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Rowan and Sarah worked with the other ranchers to document every incident, creating a timeline of Crowley's intimidation and violence stretching back 5 years. Names, dates, property damage, livestock losses, suspicious deaths. When they finished, it was 17 pages of handwritten testimony. This is good, Tom said, reviewing the final document. This is damn good. Any honest editor will have to take this seriously. Let's hope there are honest editors left, Dutch said dryly. The morning they were set to leave, Rowan woke before dawn to find Silas already up, checking and rechecking their supplies. Extra ammunition, dried food for the 3-day journey to Silver Creek and back, blankets in case they had to camp. He was being thorough to the point of obsessive. We'll be fine, Rowan said, watching him from the doorway. I know. He didn't stop packing. Just want to make sure you have everything you need. She crossed to him and put a hand on his arm. Silas, look at me. He did, reluctantly. His eyes were shadowed, and she realized he probably hadn't slept. I'll come back, she said firmly. I'll tell the story, I'll come back, and we'll figure out what to do next. Together. I can't lose anyone else, he said, his voice rough. I know that's not fair putting that weight on you, but I can't. Then it's a good thing I'm not planning to die. She squeezed his arm. Have a little faith in me. I have all the faith in the world in you. It's everyone else I don't trust. They left an hour after sunrise, Rowan and Sarah riding side by side with Silas slightly ahead. The morning was brutally cold, frost glittering on every surface, their breath coming out in white clouds. Rowan had layered every piece of warm clothing she owned and was still freezing within an hour. They made good time the first day, covering nearly 30 miles before stopping to camp in a sheltered hollow. Sarah proved to be good company, practical and steady with a dry sense of humor that surfaced once she got comfortable. Tom thinks I'm crazy for doing this, she said as they set up camp while Silas tended the horses. Says I should leave the dangerous work to the men. What do you think? I think if we left everything to the men, we'd still be waiting for someone to fix problems instead of fixing them ourselves. She stirred the pot of beans heating over their small fire. My mother always told me a woman's place was wherever she decided to stand. Took me 30 years to understand what she meant. Smart woman, your mother. She was. Died of pneumonia when I was 20, but she packed a lot of wisdom into those years. Sarah was quiet for a moment. You scared? Terrified, Rowan admitted, but also angry, and I've learned the anger's more useful than the fear. Good. Hold on to that. Silas returned, and they ate in companionable silence, huddled close to the fire. When it was time to sleep, Silas took first watch, sitting with his rifle across his knees and his eyes on the darkness beyond their camp. Rowan lay wrapped in her blankets, listening to the night sounds of the frontier, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. The next day brought them to Silver Creek, a town twice the size of Red Hollow, with actual paved streets and a hotel that didn't look like it would collapse in a strong wind. The newspaper office was easy to find, a squat brick building with Silver Creek Chronicle painted on the window. This is it, Sarah said, dismounting. Ready? As I'll ever be. Silas caught Rowan's hand as she moved past him. If anything feels wrong, if the editor seems bought off or hostile, you leave. Don't try to convince him. Don't push. Just leave. Understood? Understood. She squeezed his hand. Wait here. We'll be back soon. The newspaper office smelled of ink and paper and tobacco smoke. A young clerk looked up from his desk as they entered, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of two dusty ranch women. Help you? We need to speak with the editor, Rowan said. It's urgent. Mr. Patterson's busy. It's about Rhett Crowley and what he's doing in Red Hollow, Sarah interrupted. I think he'll want to hear this. The clerk's expression changed, curiosity replacing dismissiveness. Wait here. He disappeared into a back office and returned a minute later with a man in his 50s, ink-stained and rumpled, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. I'm James Patterson. You have information about Crowley? We have 17 pages of documented intimidation, theft, arson, and suspected murder, Rowan said, pulling the papers from her satchel, all tied to Crowley's attempts to force small ranchers out of the valley. Patterson took the papers and read in silence, his expression growing darker with each page. Finally, he looked up. This is serious. You understand if I print this, Crowley will come after me. And after you. He's already coming after us, Sarah said. At least this way, people will know why. You're willing to go on record? Use your real names? We are. Patterson studied them for a long moment, clearly weighing the risks. Then he nodded. All right, sit down. Tell me everything. They spent 3 hours in that office, going through the timeline, answering Patterson's questions, providing every detail they could remember. He took notes furiously, occasionally stopping to clarify a point or ask for elaboration. By the time they finished, his hand was cramping, and they were all exhausted. This is explosive, Patterson said finally. If even half of this is true, and I believe it is, Crowley's been running a criminal enterprise for years. I'll need to verify some details, talk to sources, but I'll run this, front page, full spread. It'll be out in 4 days. Thank you, Rowan said, relief flooding through her. Don't thank me yet. This is going to start a war. You sure you're ready for that? The war already started, Sarah said. We're just making sure people know about it. They left the office and found Silas pacing outside, his relief visible when he saw them. How'd it go? He's running the story, Rowan said. 4 days. Then we better get home and prepare. Once that paper hits the street, all hell's going to break loose. The ride back was faster, all of them anxious to return before news of their trip reached Crowley. They made it home late on the third day, exhausted and saddle-sore, but intact. Dutch and Tom were waiting at the ranch when they arrived. You did it? Dutch asked. We did it, Sarah confirmed. Good. Now we prepare for the consequences. He spread a map on the kitchen table. I've been thinking about defensive positions, ways we can make our ranches harder to attack. If Crowley decides to hit us directly after the story breaks, we need to be ready. They spent the evening planning, organizing, preparing for battle. It felt surreal, ranchers and farmers talking strategy like soldiers. But that's what they'd become, Rowan realized. An army of ordinary people who'd decided enough was enough. That night, after everyone had left and she was getting ready for bed, Silas appeared in the bedroom doorway. It was the first time he'd crossed that threshold since she'd arrived months ago. Can I come in? He asked. Of course. He entered looking uncomfortable but determined. I wanted to say, what you did, going to Silver Creek, telling the story, that took real courage. More than most people have. I had help. Sarah was there too. I know, but you're the one who started this. You're the one who refused to hide. He paused. I've been doing a lot of thinking while you were gone, about us, about this arrangement we made. Rowan's heart started beating faster. What about it? When you answered my advertisement, I thought I was getting a housekeeper who could help with chores, someone practical and quiet who'd stay out of the way. Instead, I got a partner, someone who fights beside me, who challenges me, who makes me want to be better than I am. He took a breath. What I'm trying to say is, this stopped being a business arrangement a long time ago. For me, anyway. For me too, Rowan said softly. I don't expect anything from you. I know we agreed this would be. She crossed to him and kissed him, cutting off whatever else he was going to say. It was awkward at first, neither of them quite sure what they were doing, but it was also real and warm and perfect in its imperfection. When they pulled apart, Silas was smiling, really smiling, not the ghost of humor, but genuine happiness. So does this mean... It means we're married, Rowan said. Really married, not just on paper. I'd like that. So would I. He stayed that night, and for the first time since leaving her father's house, Rowan felt truly at home. Not because of the place, but because of the person beside her. They'd found each other in the midst of chaos and built something solid against impossible odds. The paper came out 4 days later, exactly as promised. The headline screamed across the front page, Valley of Fear, How Rhett Crowley Built an Empire on Intimidation and Murder. Patterson had done his job well, laying out the evidence methodically, including interviews and testimonies from multiple sources. Word reached the ranch by mid-afternoon. Dutch rode over with a copy, his expression grim but satisfied. It's everywhere. Silver Creek, Bridgeton, even making waves in the territorial capital. People are talking. What about Crowley? Silas asked. Haven't heard from him directly, but his men have been seen riding all over the valley, probably trying to intimidate people into recanting their statements. Will it work? Not this time. Too many people have seen the article. The truth's out there now. He can't put it back in the bottle. But Rowan knew the real test was still coming. Crowley wouldn't just accept this exposure quietly. He'd retaliate, probably soon, and when he did, they needed to be ready. The question was, ready for what? The answer came 3 days later, and it wasn't what any of them expected. Rowan was in the barn checking on a cow that had been showing signs of illness when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. Her hand went instinctively to the pistol at her hip, and she moved to the barn door carefully, staying in shadow. What she saw made her freeze. Rhett Crowley sat at the head of a column of at least 20 riders, all armed, all wearing the kind of expressions men got when they were preparing for violence. But they weren't charging or spreading out for an attack. They were just sitting there, arranged in a neat formation in the middle of the yard. Silas emerged from his house, rifle in hand, and Rowan saw him go very still when he registered how many men Crowley had brought. She started to move toward him, but Crowley's voice stopped her. "Mrs. Mercer, why don't you join us? This concerns you as much as anyone." Rowan stepped out of the barn, her hand still on her pistol, and walked to stand beside Silas. Up close, she could see that Crowley looked different. The casual arrogance was still there, but underneath it was something harder, more dangerous. This wasn't a man making idle threats anymore. This was a man pushed to his limit. "You've made quite the nuisance of yourself," Crowley said conversationally. "That little newspaper article has caused me no end of trouble. Questions from territorial authorities, clients asking uncomfortable questions, banks suddenly nervous about doing business. You should be proud. You've managed to do more damage than 10 years of everyone else's whining combined." "If you came here to complain, you wasted a trip," Silas said. "I came here to make you an offer, my final offer." Crowley leaned forward in his saddle. "I'll buy your ranch, full fair market value, not the reduced price I offered before. You take the money, you leave the valley, and this all goes away." "And if we refuse? Then I stop playing by the rules." Crowley's smile was cold. "Up until now, I've been careful. Intimidation? Yes. Small acts of sabotage, certainly, but nothing that couldn't be explained away or denied. That changes today. If you don't accept my offer, I'm coming after you with everything I have. No more subtlety, no more deniability. I will destroy you, and I'll make sure everyone knows it was me. Because at this point, I don't care anymore. You've already damaged my reputation. Might as well earn it." Rowan felt ice in her veins. This wasn't a bluff. Crowley meant every word. "Why tell us?" she asked. "Why not just attack?" "Professional courtesy. I may be ruthless, Mrs. Mercer, but I'm not without honor. You fought well, harder than I expected. You've earned the right to walk away with your lives and some money in your pocket. Take it. Because if you don't, what comes next will make everything before look like a friendly disagreement." Silas was silent for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he said quietly, "Get off my land." Crowley's expression didn't change. "That's your answer?" "That's my answer. This ranch belonged to my wife. She put everything she had into building it. I won't dishonor her memory by selling it to the man who tried to steal it." "And you?" Crowley looked at Rowan. "You're willing to die for this? For a piece of land that isn't even yours?" "It is mine," Rowan said firmly. "I've bled for it, worked for it, fought for it. That makes it as much mine as anyone's. So yes, I'm willing to fight." Crowley studied them both, then shook his head slowly. "Brave and stupid. What a combination." He straightened in his saddle. "You have 24 hours to reconsider. After that, all bets are off." He wheeled his horse around and the riders followed, leaving in the same disciplined formation they'd arrived in. Rowan and Silas stood watching until they disappeared, neither speaking, both processing what had just happened. "We need to get word to the others," Silas said finally. "If he's coming after us openly, he'll hit them too." They sent riders immediately, one to Dutch, one to the Briggs brothers, one to Coleman. By nightfall, all the allied ranchers had gathered at the Mercer place, grim-faced and armed. "He's making his final move," Dutch said, pacing the small living room. "Win or lose, this ends now." "We need to think strategically," Tom argued. "Figure out where he'll hit first and concentrate our defense there." "He'll hit here first," Coleman said, nodding at Rowan. "This is personal for him now. She embarrassed him with that newspaper article. He'll want to make an example." "Then we fortify this place," Samuel suggested. "Bring everyone here. Make our stand together." "That leaves all our ranches undefended," his brother pointed out. "Crowley could burn us out while we're sitting here." "So we split up," Dutch said. "Half stay here, half spread out to the other ranches. We can't be everywhere at once, but we can make it costly for him no matter where he strikes." They argued for hours, planning and counter-planning, trying to anticipate Crowley's moves. Finally, they settled on a compromise. 10 men would stay at the Mercer Ranch, while the others returned to their properties with instructions to light signal fires at the first sign of trouble. "It's not perfect," Tom admitted, "but nothing about this situation is perfect." The men settled in for a long night. Some took positions around the property, watching the approaches. Others tried to sleep in shifts, though Rowan doubted anyone was actually resting. She certainly wasn't. She sat at the kitchen table cleaning her rifle for the third time, her hands moving automatically while her mind raced. Silas appeared beside her, setting down 2 cups of coffee. You should try to sleep. Can't. Too wired. She accepted the coffee gratefully. You? Same. He sat down across from her, and in the lamplight, he looked older than his years, worn down by stress and responsibility. I keep thinking about Martha, about what she'd say if she could see all this. What do you think she'd say? Probably that I'm an idiot for not taking Crowley's money and running. He smiled without humor. She was practical that way. She knew when to fight and when to fold. But she also built this place from nothing, Rowan said. That doesn't sound like someone who gave up easily. No, she didn't give up easily. He was quiet for a moment. I'm scared, Rowan. Not for me. I've made my peace with whatever happens, but for you. You didn't sign up for a war. Actually, I did. I just didn't know it at the time. She reached across the table and took his hand. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. That's what marriage means. Real marriage. He squeezed her hand and they sat there in the quiet kitchen, 2 people who'd found each other in chaos and refused to let go even as the world burned around them. Dawn came cold and gray, and with it, a tense silence that made everyone jumpy. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Nothing happened. Maybe he changed his mind, Coleman suggested around midday. He didn't change his mind, Dutch said flatly. He's making us wait, letting the fear build. It's a tactic. Well, it's working, Samuel muttered. The attack came at sunset, and it came from the direction no one expected, from the south, across open ground where there was minimal cover. They heard the thunder of hooves first, then saw the riders cresting the ridge, at least 15 of them, riding hard and fast straight toward the ranch. Positions, Silas shouted, and men scrambled to the defensive spots they'd prepared. Rowan took up her place behind an overturned water trough, rifle ready, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The riders opened fire while still at distance, bullets kicking up dirt and splintering wood. The defenders returned fire, and the air filled with gun smoke and noise. Rowan aimed carefully, squeezed the trigger the way Silas had taught her, saw a rider's hat fly off as her bullet passed close. She worked the bolt, ejected the spent casing, chambered another round, fired again. The riders split, some circling toward the barn, others heading for the house. It was coordinated, professional. These weren't random thugs, they were men who knew what they were doing. One of them threw something that landed on the barn roof. Seconds later, flames erupted. The barn! Someone shouted, but they couldn't break position to fight the fire, not with bullets still flying. A rider charged straight at Rowan's position, firing wildly. She ducked, felt the water trough shudder as bullets punched through it, then popped back up and fired 3 times in rapid succession. The third shot caught the horse, and the animal went down screaming, throwing its rider. The fight lasted maybe 10 minutes, though it felt like hours. Then, as suddenly as they'd attacked, the riders broke off and retreated, leaving 2 of their number dead in the yard and the barn fully engulfed in flames. "Anyone hurt?" Dutch called out. "Coleman took a graze on the arm," someone answered. "Nothing serious?" They managed to save the horses from the burning barn but lost everything else. Hay, tools, tack, the winter stores they'd worked so hard to accumulate. By the time the fire died down, the structure was a total loss, just like the Briggs barn weeks earlier. "This is just the opening move," Tom said, staring at the smoking ruins. "He wanted to show us he can hit us whenever he wants." "We hurt him, though," Samuel pointed out. 2 of his men down, probably more wounded. "He'll think twice before charging in like that again." "No, he won't," Rowan said quietly. "He'll just come back with more men." She was right. 3 hours later, as they were still dealing with the aftermath of the first attack, signal fires lit up on the northern horizon. The Murphy Ranch was under attack, then fires to the west, Coleman's place. Crowley had split his forces and was hitting multiple ranches simultaneously, forcing them to choose which to defend. "We have to split up," Dutch said. "Tom, Samuel, take 4 men and head to Murphy's. I'll take the rest to Coleman's." "What about here?" Silas asked. "You hold here. You've got Rowan and whatever men can be spared. It'll have to be enough." They scattered, riders galloping off in different directions, and suddenly the Mercer Ranch felt very empty with only 5 defenders left. Rowan helped reload rifles, carried ammunition, tried to stay busy so she wouldn't think about how exposed they were. The second attack came near midnight. This time there was no warning charge, no dramatic thunder of hooves, just shadows moving in the darkness, trying to sneak close before opening fire. But one of the defenders spotted them and raised the alarm, and suddenly everyone was shooting at shapes they could barely see. A bullet crashed through the kitchen window. Another punched through the door. Rowan was lying flat on the floor, firing out the broken window at muzzle flashes, when she heard someone scream. She turned to see one of the defenders, a young ranch hand named Billy, clutching his leg, blood pouring between his fingers. "Stay down!" Silas shouted at her, but Rowan was already crawling toward Billy, dragging him behind cover. The wound was bad, the bullet having caught him in the thigh, and she knew if she didn't stop the bleeding fast, he'd die. She tore strips from her skirt, fashioned a tourniquet the way she'd seen it done, twisted it tight despite Billy's screams. Blood kept coming, but slower now, and she wrapped the wound as best she could with hands that shook. "You're going to be fine," she told him, though she had no idea if that was true. "Just stay still." More gunfire, someone shouting, then the sound of hooves retreating, and suddenly it was over again. Rowan sat back against the wall, covered in Billy's blood, shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. Silas appeared, checking her for wounds with hands that were surprisingly gentle given the chaos around them. "Are you hurt?" "No, Billy is. He needs a doctor. Nearest doctor's in Red Hollow, and I'm not sure he'd come even if we asked." Silas looked at the tourniquet she'd applied. "You did good work here. Probably saved his life." The night dragged on. The other defenders returned near dawn, exhausted and battered. The Murphy Ranch had lost their chicken coop and part of their fence. Coleman's place had taken damage to their well house. Everyone was tired, running low on ammunition, nerves stretched to breaking. "We can't keep this up," Tom said bluntly. "Another few nights like this, and we'll have nothing left to defend." "So what do you suggest?" Dutch asked. "We can't abandon our homes. We need to end this. We need to take the fight to Crowley." "With what?" Samuel demanded. "We're outnumbered, outgunned, and exhausted. He's bleeding us dry exactly like he planned." They argued in circles, too tired to think clearly, but too wired to rest. Rowan listened, watching the sun rise over what was left of their barn, and felt something crystallize in her mind. A crazy idea, the kind that would probably get them all killed but might also be their only chance. "What if we force him to commit everything at once?" she said. The argument stopped. Everyone turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" Silas asked. "He's spreading his attacks thin, hitting us in different places, so we have to spread thin too. But what if we give him a target too good to resist? Something that would make him bring all his men, all his resources to one place." "Like what?" Dutch asked. "Like all of us together, in one location. We send word to Crowley that we're having a meeting tomorrow night, all the Allied ranchers in one place, planning our next move. We make sure he hears about it, make it sound legitimate. He'll see it as his chance to end this in one strike." "That's suicide," Coleman said flatly. "We'd be giving him exactly what he wants." "No, we'd be giving him what he thinks he wants, because we won't actually be having a meeting. We'll be setting a trap." Tom leaned forward. "What kind of trap?" Rowan's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. "We picked the location carefully, somewhere that looks defensible, but actually gives us advantages he won't see until it's too late. We spread rumors about the meeting through channels we know Crowley's watching. And when he shows up with all his men expecting to catch us off guard, we're ready for him." "It's risky," Dutch said slowly. "If anything goes wrong, we lose everything." "We're already losing everything," Sarah Briggs pointed out. She'd arrived an hour earlier, helping tend the wounded. "At least this way we're choosing the terms of engagement." "Where would we set it?" Silas asked. "The location matters." Rowan had been thinking about that. "What about the old mining camp in Copper Canyon? The one that's been abandoned for years?" "That's 10 miles from here," Tom said. "Rough terrain." "Exactly. It's in neutral territory, not anyone's ranch, which makes it believable for a meeting. But it's also got only 2 ways in, both of which we can watch and defend. And the buildings there, falling apart as they are, would give us cover and good firing positions." The men exchanged glances. Slowly, Dutch nodded. "It could work. It's crazy, but it could work. But it could... We'd need to scout the location first," Silas said. "Make sure it's suitable. And we'd need to be damn sure Crowley takes the bait." "Leave that to me," Sarah said. "My cousin works at the hotel in Red Hollow. Half of Crowley's men drink there. I'll make sure the right information gets to the right ears." They spent the rest of the day planning. Who would go? Who would stay behind to protect the ranches? How they'd position themselves in the canyon where they'd place shooters? What supplies they'd need? It was hasty and improvised, the kind of plan that had 100 ways to fail, but it was also better than slowly being ground down into nothing. That evening, Silas and Rowan rode out to scout Copper Canyon. The sun was setting as they entered the narrow defile, painting the rock walls in shades of red and gold. The old mining camp was exactly as Rowan remembered from the one time she'd passed through months ago, a collection of half-collapsed buildings clustered around what used to be the main shaft, abandoned when the silver ran out 5 years earlier. They dismounted and walked through the ruins, assessing angles and positions. "It's actually perfect," Silas admitted. "These old buildings give good cover. The walls of the canyon make it hard to flank us, and that entrance is narrow enough that they can't rush us all at once." "So you think it'll work?" "I think it's the best bad idea we've got." He turned to look at her in the dying light. "You know this is probably where we die, right? Even if everything goes according to plan, we're still outnumbered. The odds aren't good." "I know." Rowan walked to the edge of the camp, looking out at the valley spreading below. "But I'd rather die fighting on my feet than live on my knees, and maybe we don't die. Maybe we pull this off and Crowley loses everything. Wouldn't that be something?" Silas came to stand beside her. "You're remarkable, you know that? When you stepped off that train, I thought you were the last person who could survive out here. I was wrong about a lot of things, but that might have been the biggest." "I was wrong about things too," Rowan said. "I thought I was coming west to escape my old life. But really, I was coming here to find a new one. To find you." He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious. When they pulled apart, both their faces were wet with tears neither of them acknowledged. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Silas said, "I want you to know I love you. I think I've loved you since the day you stood up to Crowley in the yard, refusing to back down. I should have told you sooner." "I love you too," Rowan whispered. "And we're going to survive this, both of us, together." It was a promise she had no right to make, but she made it anyway. Because sometimes hope was all you had, and you held on to it even when logic said you shouldn't. They rode back to the ranch in darkness, and Rowan tried to memorize everything. The feel of the horse beneath her, the stars overhead, the solid presence of the man beside her. If these were her last hours, she wanted to remember them clearly. The plan was set in motion the next morning. Sarah rode to town and planted the information about the meeting, making it sound secretive but not secretive enough, the kind of half-hidden plan that would definitely reach Crowley's ears. The ranchers gathered their best men, 22 in total, including Rowan, and prepared to move to Copper Canyon. "If we're not back by dawn tomorrow, assume we're dead," Dutch told the handful of people staying behind to guard the ranches. "Take whatever you can carry and get out of the valley. Start over somewhere else." The ride to Copper Canyon took most of the afternoon. They arrived well before sunset, giving them time to position themselves in the ruins. Rowan took up a spot in what used to be the assayer's office, a stone building with good sight lines toward both entrances. Her rifle was clean, loaded, ready. Her pistol sat on her hip. She'd said goodbye to fear that morning, or maybe she'd just learned to function despite it. As the sun set, they waited in silence. No fires, no talking, just 22 desperate people hoping their gamble would pay off. Hours crawled by. The moon rose, cold and pale. Rowan's legs cramped from crouching behind her stone wall, but she didn't move. Then, near midnight, they heard it. Horses. Lots of them. Crowley had taken the bait. Rowan watched through a gap in the stone as riders filled the canyon entrance, at least 30 of them, maybe more. They moved cautiously, suspicious of ambush, but clearly believing they had the advantage. Crowley himself rode in the middle of the column, protected by his men. They got halfway through the canyon before Silas's voice rang out from the darkness. "That's far enough, Crowley." The column stopped. Riders turned, looking for the source of the voice, hands moving to weapons. Crowley sat perfectly still on his horse, and even from a distance, Rowan could see the moment he realized he'd been tricked. "An ambush," he said, loud enough to carry. "Clever, I underestimated you again." "Last chance," Silas called. "Tell your men to ride out. Leave the valley, leave us alone, and nobody else has to die." Crowley laughed, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. "You really think I'm leaving with nothing, after everything you've cost me?" "No, Mercer. We finish this tonight. And when you're dead, I'll burn every ranch that stood with you to the ground." "Then I guess we're doing this," Silas said. For one frozen moment, nobody moved. Then Crowley shouted, "Take them!" and chaos erupted. Gunfire lit up the canyon like lightning, muzzle flashes illuminating faces twisted with rage and fear. Rowan fired and reloaded and fired again, working mechanically, trying not to think about the fact that they were still outnumbered even with the advantage of position. Bullets ricocheted off stone around her. Someone screamed. A horse went down, throwing its rider. The battle raged through the night, neither side gaining clear advantage. Crowley's men had numbers, but the defenders had cover and desperation. Bodies fell on both sides. The air filled with smoke and the copper smell of blood. Rowan was reloading her rifle when she saw Crowley himself dismount and take cover behind a boulder, maybe 40 yards from her position. He was directing his men, organizing them for what looked like a coordinated rush on the main building where Silas and Dutch had positioned themselves. If that rush succeeded, if they broke through the center of the defensive line, the fight was over. Rowan made a decision. She left her position, moving carefully through the ruins, keeping low and quiet. Her heart hammered, but her hands were steady as she worked her way closer to Crowley's position. 20 yards. 15, 10. She raised her rifle, sighted down the barrel at the man who'd terrorized the valley for years. Her finger touched the trigger, and in that moment she realized she was about to kill someone in cold blood. Not in the heat of battle, not in immediate self-defense, but deliberately, with calculation. The thought made her hesitate, just for a second. But a second was enough. Crowley turned and saw her. His hand went to his gun. Rowan fired, but her hesitation had cost her. The shot went wide, catching him in the shoulder instead of the chest. He spun and fell, but he was still alive, still dangerous, and now he was bringing his pistol up, aiming directly at her. A rifle cracked from somewhere behind her. Crowley jerked and fell back, the pistol falling from his hand. Rowan turned to see Silas standing there, his rifle smoking, his face grim. "You all right?" he asked. "I hesitated," she said, her voice shaking. "I could have ended it, but I hesitated." "Good," Silas said. "That means you're still human. Now get back to cover before someone else shoots you." With Crowley down, something broke in his men. Some kept fighting, but others started pulling back, and within minutes the retreat became a rout. Riders galloped for the canyon entrance, abandoning position and wounded in their desperation to escape. The defenders let them go. They were too exhausted to pursue, too busy dealing with their own wounded and counting their losses. When dawn finally came, painting the canyon in shades of gray and pink, it was over. 4 defenders were dead, 8 wounded. Crowley's casualties were higher, at least 10 dead that they could count, and the wounded they'd left behind. Crowley himself lay unconscious, bleeding from Silas's shot and Rowan's shoulder wound, but alive. "What do we do with him?" Tom asked, looking down at the unconscious man. "We turn him over to the territorial marshal," Dutch said. "With all the witnesses to what happened here, all the evidence we've compiled, he'll hang." "And if the marshal won't take him?" "Then we deal with it ourselves," Silas said grimly. "But we try legal channels first. We're not murderers." They loaded the wounded, both their own and Crowley's captured men, onto wagons and started the long journey back. Rowan rode beside Silas, too tired to speak, too numb to fully process what they'd survived. They'd won. Against impossible odds, with improvised planning and desperate courage, they'd actually won. But the cost had been high, and looking at the tired, blood-stained faces around her, Rowan wondered if anyone ever really won a war, or if everyone just lost in different ways. The territorial marshal arrived in Red Hollow 6 days after the battle at Copper Canyon, and his presence changed everything in ways both immediate and subtle. Marshal William Grant was a weathered man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen enough of human nature to be surprised by very little. He listened to their testimonies, examined the evidence, and interviewed Crowley's captured men with the kind of methodical thoroughness that suggested he actually cared about justice. Crowley himself had survived his wounds, though he'd never regained full use of his right arm. He sat in the makeshift jail cell the marshal had established in Red Hollow's tiny courthouse, and according to Dutch, who'd seen him, the man looked smaller somehow. Diminished, like a balloon that had finally deflated after being stretched too tight for too long. "He keeps asking to make a deal," Dutch reported at a meeting of the Allied ranchers. offering information about other corrupt officials, business partners, anyone he thinks might buy him leniency. Will it work? Sarah asked. Marshall says no. Too many witnesses, too much evidence. Says Crowley will hang, and most of his operation will go down with him. Dutch rubbed his tired eyes. It's over, really over. But Rowan knew it wasn't that simple. The fighting might be done, but the consequences were just beginning. 4 men had died defending their homes, leaving behind widows and children. Another dozen carried wounds that would affect them for the rest of their lives. And every ranch in the valley had sustained damage that would take months or years to repair. The Mercer Ranch had lost their barn, a significant portion of their winter feed, and countless tools and supplies. Billy, the young ranch hand Rowan had saved, would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. The cattle were scattered again, traumatized by the fighting, and would need weeks to settle. We need to rebuild, Silas said on the morning after the marshal's arrival. He and Rowan stood looking at the ruins of their barn, and his voice was flat with exhaustion. But I don't know if we have the money or the energy. We'll find both, Rowan said, though she felt just as drained. We didn't survive all that just to give up now. I'm not giving up. I'm just being realistic. We're broke, Rowan. Between lost livestock and destroyed property, we're deeper in debt than we were before this started. Then we asked for help from the people we helped. They're in the same position we are. So we all help each other. That's how this works, isn't it? That's what the alliance was supposed to mean. Silas looked at her, and slowly, something like hope crept into his expression. You really believe that? I have to. The alternative is too depressing. She called a meeting that afternoon, gathering everyone at the Mercer place despite the lack of a barn to meet in. They stood in the cold November air, 18 people representing 6 ranches, all of them exhausted and hurting, but still standing. We won, Rowan said, looking at their faces. Against a man with more money, more men, and more power. We won because we stood together. But winning the fight doesn't mean we've won the war for survival. Winter's coming, and every ranch here is damaged. If we try to recover separately, some of us won't make it. What are you proposing? Tom asked. Collective rebuilding. We pool what resources we have left, lumber, nails, labor, food, and we prioritize repairs based on need, not individual ownership. We rebuild the Briggs barn first because they lost theirs earliest, then ours. Then we focus on wells and fences and whatever else needs fixing. We work together until everyone's ranch is functional again. That's asking a lot, Coleman said carefully. Some of us have families to feed, our own problems to deal with. I know. And if you can't participate, I understand. But I think if we try to go it alone, we'll end up back where we started. Isolated, vulnerable, easy targets for the next person who wants to take advantage. Rowan took a breath. We proved we're stronger together. Let's not forget that lesson now that the immediate danger's past. There was a long silence. Then Dutch spoke up. She's right. Hell, I hate that she's right because it means more work when I'm already dead on my feet. But she's right. We stand together or we fall separately. One by one, the others nodded. Even Coleman, after a moment's hesitation, agreed. It wasn't unanimous enthusiasm. They were all too tired for that. But it was commitment, and that was enough. The work began the next day. Men and women who could barely stand from exhaustion showed up with hammers and saws and determination. They raised a new barn for the Briggs family in 4 days, working from dawn to dusk in weather that grew colder by the hour. Then they moved to the Mercer place and did the same. Rowan worked alongside everyone else, her hands blistering again just when the old calluses had toughened. Her back ached constantly. Her muscles screamed, but she pushed through because everyone else was pushing through. They were all running on fumes and stubbornness, but somehow it was enough. Sarah Briggs worked beside her one afternoon, the two of them sawing boards while men hammered above them. You know what I realized? Sarah said, not pausing in her work. What? We're not the same people we were 3 months ago. Any of us. This valley broke us down and rebuilt us into something different. Is that good or bad? Both, probably. We lost innocence, if we had any left. But we gained something too, knowledge of what we're capable of. That's not nothing. Rowan thought about that as she worked. Sarah was right. She wasn't the woman who'd stepped off the train in Red Hollow 5 months ago. That woman had been running from something, hiding from her father's plans and society's judgment. This woman was running toward something, building something, fighting for something that mattered. The change hadn't been smooth or easy. She still carried extra weight that made some tasks harder. She still heard whispers occasionally when she went to town, though the tone had shifted from mockery to grudging respect. She still had days where exhaustion and doubt made her want to quit. But she didn't quit. None of them did. Winter arrived properly in early December, bringing snow that piled up in drifts and temperatures that made morning chores an exercise in survival. But the barns were rebuilt, the cattle were settled, and everyone had enough feed stored to last until spring. It wasn't comfortable, but it was adequate. And adequate was a victory given where they'd started. Crowley's trial took place in mid-December, held in Silver Creek because Red Hollow was deemed too compromised. Rowan and Silas attended, along with most of the other ranchers who'd fought in Copper Canyon. They testified about the intimidation, the violence, the years of fear. Crowley's own men offered deals in exchange for testimony, provided details about murders and arson and systematic theft. The trial lasted 3 days. The verdict took the jury 20 minutes, guilty on all counts. Crowley was sentenced to hang, and several of his top lieutenants received prison terms ranging from 10 to 30 years. The corrupt sheriff resigned rather than face charges. Half a dozen businessmen who'd profited from Crowley's scheme suddenly found themselves under investigation. "It's not perfect justice," Marshal Grant told them after the verdict. "Some people who deserve punishment will slip through, but it's more justice than this valley's seen in a long time." Rowan watched Crowley being led away in chains, and she felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, not even relief. Just a kind of hollow exhaustion at how much suffering one man's greed had caused. "You all right?" Silas asked as they left the courthouse. "I thought I'd feel different," Rowan admitted, "vindicated or something, but I just feel tired." "That's because winning doesn't erase what it costs to win. It just means we get to keep going." They rode home through snow that was starting to fall again, and Rowan thought about cost. 4 men dead, families shattered, property destroyed, years of their lives spent in fear. That was the price of standing up to a tyrant, and no verdict could give it back. But they had stood up. That counted for something. Christmas came quietly that year. The ranching families gathered at the Murphy place, the only house large enough to hold everyone, and shared a meal cobbled together from what each family could contribute. It wasn't fancy. The turkey was small, the vegetables limited, the dessert simple, but it was shared, and that made it taste like victory. Someone produced a fiddle and there was music, awkward dancing in the cramped space, children running around with the kind of energy only children could maintain. Rowan found herself sitting next to Dutch's wife, Emma, a quiet woman she hadn't spoken with much before. "My husband says you're the reason they didn't all give up," Emma said. "Says you kept pushing when everyone else wanted to quit." "That's not true. Everyone fought hard. But you gave them a reason to fight that made sense. Unity instead of individual survival. That's not obvious out here, where everyone's so focused on their own land, their own problems." Emma smiled. "I'm glad you came to the valley, Mrs. Mercer, even if the circumstances were difficult. Call me Rowan, and thank you." Later, standing outside in the cold watching the stars, Silas came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. She leaned back against him, grateful for the warmth and the solid presence. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything, nothing, whether this will last." "The peace? The alliance, the community. Whether we'll remember how to stand together when there's not an immediate threat forcing us to." "I think we will," Silas said. "I think we learned something these past months that we won't unlearn. That we're stronger together than apart. That matters more than land or cattle or any individual thing we're trying to protect." "When did you get so wise?" "I married a woman who taught me to think differently. Some of it must have rubbed off." Rowan turned in his arms to face him. "I'm pregnant," she said. The words came out without planning, and she watched shock, joy, and fear chase each other across his face in rapid succession. "You're sure?" "Pretty sure. I've been late for 2 months, and I'm tired all the time, and yesterday I threw up 3 times before breakfast." "That could be stress." "It's not stress, Silas. I'm pregnant." He pulled her close, and she felt him trembling slightly. "I don't know if I'm ready to be a father again. I thought I was done with that part of my life." "I'm not sure I'm ready to be a mother at all," Rowan admitted. "But ready or not, it's happening." "Are you happy about it?" She thought about the question honestly. Terrified. But yes, also happy. We're building something here. Not just the ranch, but a life, a real life. A baby fits into that, even if the timing's not perfect. Nothing about us has been perfect, Silas said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Why start now? They stood there in the cold, holding each other, and Rowan felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe. Or just the acknowledgement that imperfect was enough. Winter dragged on, as winters in Wyoming did. There were hard days when the snow piled so high they could barely get to the barn, when the cold was so intense the water froze before they could carry it from the well. There were losses, 3 calves that didn't make it through a particularly brutal storm, a mare that went lame and had to be put down. There were arguments over shared resources, tensions that flared when everyone was cold and tired and sick of being cooped up. But there were also good days. Days when the sun broke through and made the snow sparkle like diamonds. Days when a neighbor showed up with extra meat from a successful hunt, shared without being asked. Days when Rowan felt the first flutter of movement in her belly and knew that life, despite everything, was continuing. She told the other women about the pregnancy in January, and their response was overwhelming. Sarah immediately started knitting baby clothes. Emma brought over a cradle that had served 3 generations of her family. Even the women who'd once whispered about her weight and her Eastern softness now treated her with a kind of protective concern that would have been suffocating if it wasn't also touching. First baby's the hardest, one of them told her. But you're strong. You'll manage. Rowan appreciated the confidence, even if she didn't entirely share it. She'd helped with deliveries back east, knew the dangers, the pain, the way things could go wrong in minutes. Out here, miles from a doctor, those risks multiplied. But worrying wouldn't change anything, so she tried to focus on what she could control. Eating well, resting when possible, preparing as best she could. The alliance held through winter, though it was tested. There were disagreements about how to divide remaining feed when supplies ran low. There was tension when the Murphy family couldn't contribute labor for several weeks due to illness. But they worked through it, sometimes grudgingly, sometimes with surprising grace. It's not perfect, Dutch said at a February meeting, but it's working. That's more than I expected. Spring came late and reluctant, with false starts and unexpected snow. But eventually the temperatures rose, the snow melted, and the valley turned green. The cattle, thin after the hard winter but alive, began to fatten on new grass. Fences were repaired, fields planted, the endless cycle of ranch work continuing. Rowan's pregnancy became obvious, her body changing in ways she was still getting used to. She couldn't ride as easily anymore, couldn't do the heavy lifting. It frustrated her until Silas pointed out that there were plenty of other tasks that needed doing: bookkeeping, planning, organizing supplies. Leadership work that she was actually better at than the physical labor anyway. You don't have to prove yourself anymore, he told her. Everyone knows what you're capable of. I still need to feel useful. Then be useful in the ways that make sense now. Save your strength for what's coming. What was coming arrived in late May, 3 weeks earlier than expected. Rowan's water broke while she was hanging laundry, and the first contractions hit hard enough to double her over. Silas found her clinging to the clothesline, her face white with pain and fear. It's too early, she gasped. Babies come when they come. We'll handle it. He called for Billy, who rode to fetch Sarah and Emma and anyone else who could help. Then he got Rowan inside, helped her into bed, and tried to look confident despite the terror she could see in his eyes. The labor was long and brutal. Contractions that seemed to tear her apart, pain beyond anything she'd imagined, hours that blurred together into one endless nightmare. Sarah coached her through it with calm authority. Emma handled the practical matters, and Silas held her hand and let her squeeze until she thought she might break his fingers. I can't do this, Rowan sobbed at one point, utterly exhausted. You can, Sarah said firmly. You've survived worse than this. You can survive this too. I don't want to survive it. I want it to be over. Then push. Make it be over. So she pushed and pushed and pushed until she had nothing left, until her body was just a vehicle for agony and effort. And finally, as the sun was setting outside, she heard it, a thin, angry wail that was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. It's a girl, Sarah said, placing the small, squirming bundle on Rowan's chest. A healthy girl. Rowan looked down at her daughter, red-faced and furious and absolutely perfect, and started crying. Not from pain anymore. but from overwhelming emotion she couldn't begin to name. Relief and joy and terror and love all mixed together into something that made her chest feel too small. "She's early, but she looks good," Emma said, checking the baby with experienced hands. "Small, but she's breathing well, color's good. I think she'll be fine." Silas was crying too, Rowan realized, tears running down his face as he looked at his daughter with an expression of complete wonder. "She's beautiful," he said hoarsely. "She looks like an angry potato," Rowan said, but she was smiling. "But yes, beautiful." They named her Martha, after Silas's first wife. Rowan had suggested it weeks earlier, and though Silas had initially protested, she'd insisted. "She deserves to be remembered. She helped build this place. Our daughter should carry that legacy." The baby was small but fierce, nursing with determination and making her displeasure known loudly when things didn't suit her. "Strong lungs," Sarah said approvingly. "She'll do well." The other families came to visit over the following days, bringing gifts cobbled together from what they had: a soft blanket, carved wooden toys, precious jars of preserved fruit. Dutch brought a silver dollar to put in the baby's hand, claiming it was for luck. Tom brought firewood so Rowan could rest without worrying about keeping the house warm. "She's the first baby born to the Alliance," Emma pointed out. "That makes her special. She's proof that we're not just surviving, we're building something that lasts." Rowan hadn't thought of it that way, but Emma was right. Martha represented the future they'd fought for, a life that could grow up free of fear, in a valley where people looked after each other instead of tearing each other down. Summer came in full, and with it, the hard work of ranching. Rowan couldn't do as much physical labor with a nursing infant, but she found other ways to contribute. She took over the ranch accounts completely, discovering she had a knack for numbers and planning. She organized supply runs to town, coordinating with other ranches so they could buy in bulk and save money. She started teaching Sarah and Emma to read and write, and they taught her advanced skills in preserving food and treating livestock illnesses. The valley was changing too. With Crowley gone and his corrupt network dismantled, new businesses opened in Red Hollow. A real doctor moved to town, setting up practice in what used to be Crowley's office. The newspaper, under new ownership, started reporting honestly about local affairs. Small improvements, but they added up. The alliance evolved from emergency cooperation into something more permanent. They formalized it in July, drawing up a written agreement about mutual support, shared resources, and collective defense. They called it the Red Hollow Ranchers Association, and within months, other small ranchers were asking to join. "We started something bigger than we realized," Dutch said at a meeting. "Other valleys are watching us, asking how we did it. There's talk of forming similar groups in Silver Creek and Bridgeton." "Let them," Tom said. "The more people standing together, the harder it is for anyone to push them around." That fall, they held a harvest festival, the first real celebration the valley had seen in years. Families gathered to share food, music, and stories. Children played games. Adults danced and laughed and allowed themselves to relax in ways they hadn't been able to before. Rowan sat with Martha in her arms, watching Silas dance with Sarah while Tom played fiddle. She thought about the woman who'd arrived in Red Hollow a year earlier, desperate, running, hiding behind determination and anger. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned that strength came in forms she'd never imagined. Not the strength to make herself smaller to fit others' expectations, but the strength to stand at full size and refuse to apologize for the space she occupied. The strength to fight for what mattered, to ask for help when she needed it, to build community instead of just surviving alone. Emma sat down beside her, her own baby, born 2 months after Martha, asleep in her arms. "Quite a year," she said. "That's an understatement." "Do you ever regret it? Answering that advertisement? Coming west?" Rowan thought about the question honestly, about the fear and pain and loss this year had brought, about the moments when she'd thought she wouldn't survive, wouldn't make it through, about the cost of standing up to Crowley and what it had taken from all of them. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. It was hard, and I wouldn't want to do it again, but I'm not sorry it happened, because this," she gestured at the festival, the people, the life they'd built, "this was worth it." Winter came again, as winters always did. But this time they were prepared. Barns full of feed, houses properly repaired, communities bound together by something stronger than shared geography. When storms hit, they weathered them. When someone needed help, others showed up. It wasn't perfect. Arguments still happened. Resources were still tight. The work was still brutally hard. But they were managing, more than managing. They were thriving in the way people did when they stopped trying to do everything alone. Rowan stood on her porch one December morning, watching snow fall across the valley, Martha bundled against her chest. Silas came out to join them, wrapping his arms around them both. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I'm happy," Rowan said, and realized it was true. Not the uncomplicated happiness of fairy tales, but something earthier and more real. The happiness of work well done, of challenges faced and overcome, of love earned through shared struggle. "Good," Silas said. "You deserve to be happy." "So do you." They stood there together, watching their land, their valley, their home. The ranch was still small, still struggling in many ways. But it was theirs, built by their hands and defended by their courage. And the woman who many had once dismissed as too fat, too Eastern, too female to matter, had become the person who held it all together. Not by shrinking herself to fit others' expectations, but by refusing to shrink at all. That was the lesson this valley had taught her, written in blood and sweat and determination, that strength wore many faces, that courage came in unexpected forms, and that the people others overlooked were often the ones who changed everything. Years would pass. The ranch would grow. Martha would have siblings. The alliance would spread to other valleys, becoming a model for how communities could stand together against threats both human and natural. The story of what they'd done would be told and retold, sometimes accurately, often not. But the truth of it would remain, carried forward by the people who'd lived it. The truth that ordinary people, when they stopped being divided and started standing together, were capable of extraordinary things. That the greatest battles weren't always won by the strongest or the richest or the most powerful, but by those who simply refused to give up. And in the end, that was enough. It had to be enough. Because that was all any of them had. The determination to keep going, to keep building, to keep believing that tomorrow might be better than today if they worked hard enough to make it so. The snow kept falling, covering everything in white. And inside the warm house, a baby slept peacefully, unaware of the struggles that had secured her future. In the valley beyond, other families settled in for winter, confident they would survive because they weren't facing it alone. And on that porch, Rowan Mercer, once Rowan Hale, once the fat mail-order bride nobody expected to last, stood with her husband and daughter and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not despite who she was, but because of it. That knowledge settled into her bones like warmth, and she smiled.